Hi, everybody. We are going to get started in just a minute. Oh, looks like we are just waiting for our monitors to come on. Now, looks like we are all set. First, I would like to welcome everyone to an exciting day here discussing captioning of public educational and government access programming. And to start off this afternoon, we will have the Chief of the Disability Rights Office in the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau of the Federal Communications Commission share a few words. So, Greg, this is Gregory Leibach. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, I'm sorry, it looks like we're going to wait for our captioning. And there it is. First of all, thank you, Susie. Good afternoon, everyone. And we have a really good turnout in the room here today. It looks like folks have come from all across the country. Obviously, there's a lot of excitement about this first of its kind event this afternoon. I want to first formally welcome you all to the FCC's Roundtable event on closed captioning of public education and government, or PEG, access programming. We're very excited to have the opportunity to engage in this dialogue about important issues with regards to captioning of this type of programming with all of you who are here with us today. Representatives of local government, professionals, policymakers, captioning vendors, consumer groups, engineers, representatives from the programming industry, and others who are all here with a vested interest in this issue. Today we're going to talk through a number of the benefits of captioning for PEG programming. We're going to talk about the obligation to caption PEG programming. We're also going to talk about best practices and standards in captioning and effective and efficient captioning solutions. Information shared at this meeting will be available not only to those of you who are here in the room with us today, but also to those of you who are watching us online through our captioned webcast. And that webcast video will be retained online in an archive so that you can watch it at your convenience after the close of the meeting. First, I'd like for us to review one of the terms of art that we have, which is closed captioning itself. Closed captioning is a technology that provides visual access to audio content of video programs by displaying this content as printed words on the television screen, as you also see on the screens in our meeting room today. In addition to the displaying of text of the verbal dialogue, captions also generally identify speakers, sound effects, music, and audience reactions. Because closed captioning is hidden as encoded data transmitted within the television signal, consumers can then turn the captions on and off. Second, PEG programming can be defined as programming that is generally local in nature. For instance, public access channels that are available for use by the general public and that are usually administered either by the cable operator or by a third party designated by the franchising authority. Educational access channels are used by educational institutions for educational programming. Time on these channels is typically allocated among local schools, colleges, and universities, either by the franchising authority or the cable operator. Government access channels are used for programming for local governments. In most jurisdictions, the local governments directly control these channels. I think we can all agree when I say that such programming can be of critical importance. given that many of us are or aspire to be active members of our local community. So when such information is displayed on television, we would want to be able to access this information that is of local interest. Closed captioning is one important tool to ensure access. With 48 million Americans who are deaf or hard of hearing, being able to access local PEG programming can be considered a fundamental tenet of American citizenship. Speaking of American citizenship, I personally have an experience almost 30 years ago when I was a student at Gallaudet University here in Washington, D.C. I took a class, and all of a sudden, on that television, I saw some object appear at the top of the screen and exploded. It was a huge burst, some kind of firework or something being shown on that program. With no captions at the time, we're talking about 1986, we saw that gigantic burst in the sky, and I could have guessed many things about what that meant. My classmates who were also deaf all were left to guess at what that might have meant, and it was left to us to ask the instructor about what that was. And they said, no, that was the Space Shuttle Challenger exploding. We had to rely on someone else to tell us what that was on television. The year was 1986, and closed captioning was not widely available for a lot of programming at the time. I don't need to guess anymore. I'm able to follow what's going on television with the exception of a few particular situations or particular channels. In some cases, those may be PEG channels. And in those cases, I'm still guessing. And I would like to stop guessing. So please join me in engaging in this dynamic discussion about the captioning of PEG programming. I look forward to hearing your thoughts and questions and to returning personally for the third session this afternoon as a facilitator. Thank you, everyone. And before we get started, I also want to make sure to recognize Susie Rosen-Singleton for spearheading this effort and putting together the roundtable. There are a lot of individuals who have also supported making that happen, and I will save a lot of those thank yous for later towards the end of our session this afternoon. And without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Susie. Before we get started with our first panel, thank you, Greg, for that wonderful welcome and those inspiring remarks. I want to explain to you a little bit about what this afternoon will entail. We have 3 panels for our program this afternoon. The first is going to be focusing on the reason for captioning for PEG programming, and that's our first illustrious panel up here. Our second panel is going to be focusing on best practices for captioning, particularly for PEG programming. And we'll be focusing on technical and practical challenges in that PEG environment. The third panel is going to focus on captioning solutions. Better solutions, financial solutions, technical captioning solutions. And that is our third panel, so each panel has its own topic. We'll have 2 10-minute breaks between our first and second panel. Our refreshments are here thanks to our generous sponsors. That is the Alliance for Community Media, the National Association of Telecommunications Officers and Advisors, and Montgomery County, Maryland. So thank you to those 3 sponsors for providing the refreshments this afternoon. I also want to share with everyone here that, as Greg said, we do encourage that this be a dynamic afternoon, so we welcome your questions and your comments. We have a aisle mic in the audience here, and we'll ensure that if you want to share your thoughts or comments, that you're able to do so. For those of you who are not here in person but who are watching online, you can email us at livequestions@fcc.gov. And depending on the volume of questions there and our time restrictions, we will certainly do our best to respond to as many questions received as possible during the event. The webcast, as was mentioned, will be made available on our FCC website, as well as the presentation materials. You can follow this event on Twitter as well. You can signify your participation in the event on Twitter by tweeting your comment or question and using the hashtag FCCLive, L-I-V-E. And then you can click on refresh to view your tweets. I'd like to take a moment before we get started with our first panel to recognize those individuals who have helped to make this event possible, who are from the FCC. From the Disability Rights Office, our team, which consists of Siobhan Morris, Susan Kimmel, Robert McConnell, Elaine Gardner, and then from the front office of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, we have Rod Flowers assisting us. From CAOD, which is the Consumer Affairs and Outreach Division in the Commission, we also have moderating our live questions, Kelly Jones, DeAndrea Wilson, and Chantel Virgil, in addition to Rebecca Lockhart and Sherry Dawson. We also have a wonderful interpreting team here with us this afternoon, Gerard Williams, Helen Chang, Lindsay Snyder, Jennifer Wagner, and Jane Tubergen. We also have a captioning team. We have our alternative formats specialist, Terry Pacheco, and of course our CMR staff who are supporting the event, who are running around behind the glass screen over here, Jeff Reardon and his wonderful group. With that said, please join me now in welcoming our first panel to review the particular reason for captioning PEG programming. For this 70-minute panel, which will end around 2:15 when we'll take our first break, we're focusing on the reason for captioning. Those reasons range from legal obligation all the way over to the fact that there is a great benefit not only for people with disabilities, but for all of us. We will also explore the parameters of those legal obligations and the paradigm shifts that may happen with the knowledge that captioning does provide a great benefit to us in many more ways than we expect. Now, we are honored to have with us today. I'm going to follow alphabetical order for our introductions here. First, we have Elliot Greenwald. He is the Deputy Chief of the Disability Rights Office in CGB here at the FCC. We have Amanda Maisels. She is the Deputy Chief of the Disability Rights Section in the Civil Rights Division at the U.S. Department of Justice. We also have Claude Stout. He is the Executive Director of Telecommunications for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Incorporated, or TDI. And last but certainly not least, we have Mike Wassenaar. He is the President of the Alliance for Community Media. Each of you will have about 5 to 10 minutes to speak, to share any information that you have about our particular topic for this panel, the reason for captioning PEG programming. And I'd like to start with Elliot. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Susie. Can somebody put up the PowerPoint? Thank you. Now we have to see if this clicker can work. But anyway, I will be talking about the FCC requirements regarding captioning of PEG programming, and Amanda will talk about the ADA requirements. Let's see if the clicker works now.
You can just say click.
Okay, can somebody, thank you.
Say click whenever you want to move forward.
Okay, thank you, Rosaline, for clicking for me. So the FCC requirements to caption PEG programming vary depending on whether the programming is shown on television or via Internet protocol. On television, PEG programming must be captioned unless the programming is exempt. There is no automatic exemption for PEG programming. And under the current requirements, 100% of all new programming that is not exempt must be captioned, and 75% of pre-rule programming must be captioned, and that's programming prior to January 1st, 1998 for analog programs, and prior to July 1st, 2002 for digital programs, which means for most practical purposes, 100% of programming must be captioned. Next slide. Okay. Now, there are exceptions to the 100% captioning requirement for new non-exempt programming shown on television. The first exception is programming that falls under one of the 13 categorical exemptions, which I'll be getting into in a moment. The other is that video programming distributors, that's the video programming distributors are generally the broadcasting stations and the cable and satellite stations, networks, cable and satellite distributors, rather. They are not required to caption PEG programming that is not subject to their editorial control. However, the producers and owners of the PEG programming must caption such programming. So in other words, for this, and that's 79.1E9 of the FCC rules. So for this type of program, if it's not subject to, for PEG programming that's not subject to the editorial control of the distributors, the producers and owners must provide the captioning. Next, please. Thank you. So I'll briefly go over the 13 categorical exemptions to the captioning requirements. First one is rarely an issue anymore. That's programming subject to contractual captioning restrictions in effect before February 8th, 1996. So since that's almost 20 years ago, there's very little programming now that's subject to that to that exemption. Another is programming where the requirement has been waived, and I'll get into that in a moment. Those are the individual exemptions based on economic burden that distributors and owners and video programmers can apply for. There's programming that's in languages other than English or Spanish. Programming that's primarily textual. In other words, it's not. There isn't really an audio component to that program. Programming that's distributed during the late night hours between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. Or if the programming is distributed over multiple time zones, then a 4-hour slot that's picked somewhere between midnight and 7 a.m., so that way the same programming can be subject to that exemption. There's also interstitials, promotional announcements, and PSAs that are 10 minutes or less in duration. Okay, next slide, please. There's the educational broadcast service programming that's pursuant to Part 27 of the rules. That's programming under specific spectrum that's subject to Part 27. However, even though that programming is exempt from the FCC's rules, because there's educational programming, it could be subject to ADA requirements. There's non-news programming that's locally produced by a video programming distributor with no repeat value and for which electronic newsroom technique is not available. Electronic newsroom technique is a technique whereby the teleprompter script is converted into captions. Now, this has to be programming that's produced by the video programming distributor, which means it has to be produced by and the distributor would be either the broadcast station or the cable system. It's not that exemption does not apply to programming that's produced by other entities, but only by the distributor. Programming on new networks for the first 4 years after that new network has been launched. And that would be either broadcast networks or cable networks, or MVPD networks. Primarily non-vocal music programming. That would be something like a symphony or a jazz concert. But if there is a if there is a vocal component to the music programming, such as, let's say, rock programming, the lyrics need to be captioned. Captioning expense in excess of 2% of gross revenues from that channel. This exemption does not exempt a channel its entirety. It basically exempts the channel for expenses that are in excess of 2% of gross revenues. Channels or streams producing revenues under $3 million would be entirely exempt. Instructional programming locally produced by public television stations, so it's only public television stations, for use in grades K through 12 as well as post-secondary schools. And again, since this is educational programming, it could be subject to ADA requirements. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now I'll go over the Internet requirements for programming shown on the Internet. So after September 30th, 2012, pre-recorded programming that was shown on TV with captions and not edited for the Internet must be captioned on the Internet. After March 30th, 2013, live and near-live programming shown on TV with captions must be shown on the Internet with captions. And after September 30th, 2013, pre-recorded video programming shown on TV for captions that has been substantially edited for the Internet must be shown with captions. Now, for archived Internet programming, as of March 30th, 2015, if a programming that was previously archived on the Internet is shown on TV with captions, then within 30 days, it must be shown on the Internet with captions. And for March 30th, as of March 30th, 2016, so that's coming up in a few months, that time frame reduces to 15 days. Also, video clips will soon need to be shown on TV with captions if the program shown on TV with captions must be shown on the Internet. And that would be for video clips beginning March 1st, 2016. Straight lift clips, those are single excerpts of programs, must be shown with captions on the Internet when posted. If they're posted after March 1st, 2017, and they're montages of video clips, which would be a single file containing multiple clips, then that must be shown on the Internet with captions. And also, starting July 1st, 2017, clips of live and near-live programming when put on the Internet must be shown with captions. Couple of pointers. Exemption petitions based on economic burden may be filed under Section 79.4D. That would not be for an exemption of having been shown on TV with captions, because they're already shown on TV with captions. But the burden would be related to, for example, if there's some economic burden related to converting the caption file or otherwise posting it on the Internet, because the captions have already been on the program once. And also the captioning that's shown on the Internet must be of at least the same quality as the captioning as it appeared on television. In February 2014, the FCC adopted caption quality requirements for captioning shown on TV, and those fall into four main criteria: accuracy, The captions must reflect the dialogue and other sounds and music in the audio track to the fullest extent possible based on the type of programming and must identify the speakers. Now, for pre-recorded programming, essentially, we expect 100% accuracy because it's time to edit the captions. For live and near-live programming where there is not time to edit the captioning, and this is done by generally done by a person doing the providing the captioning at the time the program is being exhibited on TV. There is some allowance for errors that would be made. There's also synchronicity. Captions must be synchronous with the corresponding dialogue and other sounds to the fullest extent possible based on the type of programming, and must appear at a speed that can be read by viewers. Now, again, for pre-recorded programming, synchronicity should be exact. No reason for it not to be, because that could be planned. But for live and near-live programming, since this is done by in real time by a person providing the captions, there will obviously be some delay, but the delay cannot be unreasonable. Program completeness. Captions must run from the beginning to the end of the program to the fullest extent possible based on the type of programming. This should not be a problem for pre-recorded programming. For live and near-live programming, again, before there's a cut at the end of the program, a little catch-up needs to be done, and so there could be a few issues with live and near-live programming where there's some small allowances done there. Placement. Captions must not cover up other important on-screen information, such as character faces, featured text, graphics, and other information essential to the understanding or accessing of the program's content, and other information may not cover up captions. And as I mentioned before, for the internet version of the programming must be of at least the same quality as the television captions provided of the same programming. Lastly, next slide, please. Now, even if the program is exempt under FCC rules, as I mentioned before, entities may still have an obligation under which other federal laws make the programming accessible to individuals with disabilities. In 1997, the FCC said that entities that qualify for exemption under Section 713 may be obligated under other federal statutes, such as the ADA, to make their services and programs, including video programming services, accessible to an individual with disability upon request. We do not intend our rules to preclude or supersede the operation of any other federal laws that may require an entity exempt from Section 713 to make its video programming services accessible to people with disabilities. Next slide, please. This provides some contact information at the FCC, provides our website. For those who want to keep up on what the disability rights is up to, we provide periodic blobs under Access Info. To subscribe to Access Info, you send an email to accessinfo@fcc.gov and type in the subject line or in the main body subscribe, and you will be subscribed to Access Info. We also have our contact information for the Disability Rights Office, both email, video, phone, voice, and TTY. And for anybody who has complaints about programming and captioning of programming or other accessibility issues, you can file complaints by going to the website www.fcc.gov/complaints. Okay.
Thank you, Elliot. Appreciate it. Amanda?
Good afternoon, everyone.
I'm Amanda Maisels, and I'm a Deputy Chief in the Disability Rights Section at the U.S. Department of Justice, which is part of the Civil Rights Division. We are responsible in the Disability Rights Section to enforce the Americans with Disabilities Act to ensure equal access and non-discrimination. The ADA consists of 3 main titles, and we enforce all 3 of those. Title I covers employment, and we enforce employment matters against state and local government employers. Title II covers state and local governments generally with respect to their programs, services, and activities. And Title III covers public accommodations, which are private businesses that are open to the public. So we have a lot of tools that we use to enforce the ADA and ensure equal access. And just so you have a sense of what we do, we publish technical assistance materials. We can initiate investigations. We file lawsuits. We can participate in private lawsuits. We can file amicus briefs, and we also promulgate regulations under Titles 2 and 3 of the ADA. So I'm here today to talk about how the ADA applies to PEG programming. And it applies through both Titles 2 and Title 3 of the ADA. Title II applies to the state and local governments. Yeah, is it too loud?
Well, no, you need to.
Oh, it sounds to me like it's echoing, so. Should I try this, Mike? Is this one better?
Just go back to the other microphone and just lean in a little bit.
Lean in?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, it sounds very loud to me, but and I just want to mention that I know folks have asked also about Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. So that is another law that applies, requires non-discrimination on the basis of disability, but it applies solely to entities that receive federal financial assistance and also federally conducted programs. And so many of the entities that are covered by Title II of the ADA, because their state and local governments are also receiving federal financial assistance and are covered by 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And the standards under the ADA and Section 504 are nearly identical, so the same obligations would apply under both laws. So I'll start with Title II of the ADA, and under Title II, the general requirement is that a public entity may not exclude individuals with disabilities from participation in or deny them the benefits of the services, programs, or activities of the public entity. And so with respect to PEG programming, we're talking about the governmental programming displayed on television, and this is a service, program, or activity of the public entity, and so would be covered by Title II of the ADA. There's another requirement that is more specific to this issue of captioning, and that is the effective communication requirement of Title II of the ADA. And what it says is that a public entity must provide appropriate auxiliary aids and services where necessary to afford individuals with disabilities an equal opportunity to participate in and enjoy the benefits of the services, programs, or activities of a public entity. So our regulations define what is an auxiliary aid or service, and there's a list of different types of those aids and services because this effective communication obligation applies in many different contexts, live events and, textual information and all sorts of different things. So it includes things like qualified interpreters, note takers, real-time computer-aided transcription services, written materials, exchange of written notes, assistive listening devices and systems, open and closed captioning, including real-time captioning, accessible electronic and information technology, or other effective methods. So there's a range of auxiliary aids and services that could be appropriate in different situations. So the type of auxiliary aid or service that is required is what is necessary to ensure effective communication, and that will vary in accordance with the situation or the method of communication used by an individual. So under Title II, the requirement is for a public entity to give primary consideration to the request of the individual with a disability, so their preferred auxiliary aid or service should be given primary consideration. There's also a requirement in our regulation that to be effective, the auxiliary aid or service must be provided in an accessible format, in a timely manner, and in such a way as to protect the privacy and independence of the individual with a disability. So Title II does include defenses. So this requirement to provide auxiliary aids and services is subject to two defenses. One is that the public entity is not required to provide the auxiliary aids and services when doing so would result in a fundamental alteration of the service, program, or activity. And the second defense is if it would result in an undue financial and administrative burden. So the public entity has the burden of proof to establish these defenses. And that kind of decision has to be made by the head of the public entity or the designee, and it has to be in writing, and it has to be considering all the resources available. So, for example, an entity could say, oh, well, I have this fund set aside for accommodations for disabilities, but to provide this captioning or this auxiliary aid in this context, it's going to use up all those funds. Well, that's not the resources that are supposed to be considered. It's supposed to be considered the full resources available to that entity. So that's Title II, and that covers the governmental programming that are the programs of state and local governments. So Title III of the ADA is the public accommodations piece, and so again, those are private entities that are open to the public. It could be private universities. It's Title III covers all sorts of businesses that you walk into, and this has very similar requirements to Title II. So under Title III, a public accommodation may not discriminate against individuals with disabilities on the basis of disability in the full and equal enjoyment of the goods, services, facilities, privileges, advantages, or accommodations of any place of public accommodation. So if a public accommodation has video programming that they display on television, this is one of their goods or services and is covered by the requirements of Title III. So very similarly to Title II, there's an effective communication requirement that again requires a public accommodation to take the steps that are necessary to ensure that no individuals with disabilities are excluded, denied services, segregated, or otherwise treated differently than other individuals because of the absence of auxiliary aids and services. So this, again, there's the same defenses that the public accommodation would not have to provide the auxiliary aid or service if it could demonstrate that doing so would fundamentally alter the nature of its goods or services or would result in an undue burden. And again, that's a cost analysis, the undue burden part. The auxiliary aids and services are listed, the same types of items that are listed under Title II. Under Title III, the entity doesn't have to give primary consideration to the person's choice, but no matter what they want to do, the auxiliary aid and service must be effective in ensuring equal communication with those individuals. And those are basically the similar requirements. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And now we'll turn over to Claude. And do we have my PowerPoint ready? Excellent, excellent. First of all, I want to thank the FCC for hosting this afternoon's event. The FCC has a commendable record in initiating many disability access initiatives, and this is just one more to add to that list, so thank you again to the FCC. My remarks today are going to focus on the deaf and hard of hearing people's participation in our local communities through television. Next slide, please. Let me give you a little background on myself. My wife and I were residents of Montgomery County, Maryland, which is probably 30 or so miles northwest of Washington, D.C. here. And we live in Germantown and have recently moved to North Carolina, living near Raleigh. I had the honor of serving on Montgomery County's Cable Communications Advisory Committee, and that was from the year 2004 to 2007. And I'm pleased to say that Montgomery County now offers their programs captioned. Next slide, please. Elliot covered the ground very well on the FCC's rules, and Amanda did an excellent job of covering the current Americans with Disabilities Act regulations with regards to PEG programming, so thank you to both of them. And at this point, I would like to provide another rationale for why we expect accessibility of PEG programming and therefore captioning. First of all, we are paying our taxes, just like the rest of you, to our local governments. As a resident of Montgomery County, we also see a particular percentage goes to our state governments. And just like the rest of you, we pay our monthly cable subscription fees to whatever provider that may be, whether it's satellite or cable, what have you, just like anyone else. In other words, we want to get our money's worth. And we get more bang for our buck. One more thing, and I forgot to put this on the PowerPoint, but I'd like to add it in. I forgot, we also vote, just like all of you. And if you want to cast your ballot the right way, you want to make an informed decision. And how are we to make an informed decision if we are not informed? I have to be exposed to all the appropriate information, not only through newspaper, but also through the television. I can't listen to the radio, so I'm not getting it from the radio. And I certainly can't be in person at all the various political events that are going on around the region. So one way that we can get that access to that information is through the television. Next slide. Some of you may wonder who is going to benefit from this captioning on PEG programming. And my first answer is everyone, without a doubt. And the reason I say everyone is when the FCC had put this rule into place back in 1996, it was originally intended for deaf and hard of hearing individuals to benefit from captioning. But we noticed thereafter that captioning had become universal, a universal thing. It was an access tool that a number of different groups were taking advantage of. The entire American public was enjoying access to captions. Those who speak English as a second language benefit from having access to the written English on the screen. And although they are fluent in their first language, they want to be able to participate fully in American civic life, and having that captioning support their English is a great benefit to them. Those who attend colleges or universities, a lot of those educational programs on those channels, if those included captioning, then we're going to have folks that are not left out of study groups. Interestingly, people who are going to bars, restaurants, spas, etc., these other places that have public televisions there, many hearing people like to use the captioning there, and they can tune out the loud noises that are going on around them and just read the captions of what's going on and enjoy the programming that way. Another I forgot to add, my two children, who are both hearing, have told me that they watch the captions as well. In addition to the audio, they appreciate having access to the written captions. And it's thanks to captions in many ways that they have better access to literacy, reading and writing, because they grew up reading those captions and seeing those. Next slide, please. Next, the benefit that we get from accessible PEG programming on TV. I'm going to go into this a little bit further with you. First, and of course, I was born deaf, and at the age of 5, I knew 5 words when I went to school for the deaf. Today, deaf and hard of hearing children have access to captioning on TV from birth. And their vocabulary is going to grow at a much faster rate than mine did when I was born. So I have a great advantage over me when I was born a number of years ago, let me just say. And then in 2015, we see it only gets better and better. So it's important to continue to encourage language development in these young deaf and hard of hearing people. Second, full inclusion in one's home locality, neighborhood, workplace, etc. Those are critical items. I would like a future where deaf or hard of hearing individuals don't just say hi to your neighbors. That's not enough. I would want to be able to say, in addition to saying hi, which is still important, I would like to be able to participate in the conversation of the neighborhood. If we're able to have access to that PEG programming, then I can engage in a more intellectual dialogue with members of my community who live around me about the issues that are relevant to us. And this is something that we want to have equal footing for the rest of you. Montgomery County is an incredibly diverse community. We've got people from Asian cultures, there's a strong Vietnamese contingent, there's Spanish-speaking cultures that are all represented in Montgomery County. It's incredible. Doctors and audiologists who live and work in Montgomery County can continue to expose these individuals to PEG programming. We can see the benefit there as well. I mentioned voting earlier. PEG programming, like city council meetings, county commission meetings, etc., or political events that are being shown on these channels, like candidate speech, that perhaps outlines their platform, will give us the opportunity to compare with other candidates whose platform has been outlined in order to make, again, an informed decision for one candidate or another, rather than flipping a coin on election day. Awareness of services and resources available from the local government is an important one. Montgomery County PEG channels help me know what Montgomery County has to offer to me as a resident. Not only political and civic, but also cultural, transportation resources, education resources, of which there are a plethora. So we can see where our property taxes are going. Opportunities to participate in cultural and educational life in the community as well. I mentioned Montgomery County, which has Montgomery County College and a number of different classes that are shown on their channel. Woodworking, cooking classes, cultural information, knowing the date and time for certain activities that we may want to participate in, like arts and crafts festivals or what have you. Next slide, please. Because Montgomery County ensures that those PEG programs include captioning, we see that impact not only on us, but when those captions are put on the internet, we see a much larger impact. I was looking at the Montgomery County website that has this whole archive of video content that is all captioned that allows me access to this panoply of content. I really want to thank Mitsuko Herrera from Montgomery County. If you could stand for a moment, please, Mitsuko. Mitzi, you here? Thank you, Mitzi. And if we can get back to PowerPoint, thank you. Next slide then, thank you. Elliot and Amanda both articulated to different stakeholders their responsibility in ensuring that PEG programming is including captions, and they did a wonderful job explaining that. I do want to add, and I do think that later the FCC will release an NPRM on PEG channels and accessibility thereof. I think that we need to make sure that we are ensuring that we do the work to fulfill that obligation on your behalf. One of the things that you can do there is the FCC does grant licenses to these TV stations. So potentially, as a part of granting a license to these TV stations, the FCC could, under its authority, ask whether captioning is being provided, if access is being provided on these PEG channels. Second, the local governments have a franchise agreement with these cable providers oftentimes. And I think that we ought to look at whether the local governments can really exercise a little more authority over these cable providers or satellite providers, what have you, in terms of making those PEG programs and PEG channels accessible. I want to stress that deaf and hard of hearing people are a significant part of the public interest, and the Commission here strives to serve that public interest. So in the future, as you continue to improve the accessibility of PEG channels and PEG content, any decision the FCC makes down the line, please be sure to consider that you act in the public interest. We like to encourage that MVPDs, multi-video program distributors, please do a better job at providing captioning and programming information on your programming guides. This morning, for example, I was curious to take a look at Montgomery County's channel, which I think is 36 to, 24 to 36, I believe is the range. And all it says on those cable channels is local programming, which leaves me at a loss for what that is. And so from 9 to 10, it's local programming, and 10 to 11, it's local programming, 11 to 12, it's local programming. So I'm a business person like you. We're business people like you. I got a busy schedule. You have a busy schedule. So I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to spend my time. And so getting access to the information about what is on those channels on which day and what is accessible would be incredibly valuable to us as well. Next slide. All right, I'm not sure if this is the last slide. I think this is the last one. Okay. Well, thank you then.
Thank you, Claude. Mike, the floor is yours.
Well, it's hard to follow such a strong advocate for public educational and government access television as Claude, but thank you for your advocacy. My name is Mike Wassenaar. I work with the Alliance for Community Media. We represent local governments, nonprofits, and educational institutions that provide all varieties of PEG channels and PEG programming in communities big and small, large metropolitan centers, suburban and exurban communities, and small towns across the United States. We have membership in 41 states across the country, and actually many of our members are here today and watching the proceedings live. So I want to thank the FCC for this opportunity. Despite the diversity of those entities, the core of our mission for our channels is access to information. It has been so historically since we were formed across the country in the last 40 years. And whether we're working in the public access community, at the nonprofit organization or volunteer level, or at the government access arena, it is that same common mission of access to information that drives our work. So enabling all Americans to be able to produce and consume civic media is an aspiration that all of our members of the Alliance share. So we see closed captioning as a vital technical means for achieving that goal. But because of the limited means of the vast majority of our operations, and frankly because of the lack of clarity sometimes amongst the rules of the road, we have to educate our members and find ways to find resources and devise innovative ways to make that service and those aspirations a reality. And I really welcome the opportunity to talk with people today about that. Claude talked a great deal about reasons why captioning should be occurring across America. It's that growing diversity of American communities and the demographic aging of America, I think, that is driving the need for captioning in many of our communities across the country. It's an increasingly useful tool for basic communication, and I know this as a former fan of loud rock and roll in my teens and 20s, that now as I enter my 50s, I am beginning to wonder about the need for assistance as I need to connect with others in my community. It's an inclusion technology, and we need to be thinking about it in those terms as we're doing our work to include others in civic communication. We know, for instance, that in communities across the country, seniors and groups with limited English proficiency rely on PEG programming in communities large and small. for vital information about community life and events, and they are both populations that benefit greatly from the use of captioning, as Claude could attest to a little bit earlier, and as I've seen in my work across the country. There are a couple of other additional benefits of captioning that often go unmentioned, but I think actually probably need just to be mentioned very, very briefly. The inclusion of text data with video increases search engine optimization for online video. And increasing searchability is going to be a key for building audience for producers of all stripes in the coming media environment. It makes it easier for viewers to find our content. So there's the strategic advantage if we can find ways to be able to have that text data associated with video we produce. In addition, we're beginning to see academic research benefiting from captioning. A good example of this is the Internet Archive and their ongoing project on political advertising analysis. It relies specifically on machine analysis of content that comes from captioning data. So there's an additional academic benefit that occurs as a result of that data. All that said, we need to find ways to match our aspirations, their aspirations to serve everyone, to make sure that they actually confront reality. And that's something I think is extremely important for us to be able to try to outline in terms of the economic realities for many of our members. For the vast majority of public access producers, there's little or no money in the work that they do producing content. And indeed, the entire field has been defined as non-commercial in nature, or has strictures against profit-making in many cases at the local level. So the additional per-hour production cost of closed captioning, I think, is beyond the reach of many of those groups practically. So we need to be finding solutions based upon those practicalities to be able to increase that access. Our community media centers should still be enabling technology for the community to enrich its programming and teach its use in the production that it does on a daily basis, much as we ensure that educational facilities have disability access. That actually is sort of a key educational role that we have to be playing to our minds. Further, local governments, which provide both government access television and often public access services, face severe financial pressure to provide key information services to their residents. So it's important for local governments to understand their responsibilities, and also for us to find solutions to increase access for all Americans. We have to be finding ways to be able to make this happen. I believe this means providing the legal information, professional vendor options, and technical education that we're doing today, but it also means working with vendors, technologists, and advocates to build lower cost options, in some cases to build voluntary structures to help communities in rural America, and to find more financial resources for this vital work. So let me give you a concrete example of what this could mean. Mount Morris, Vermont's Community Media Center serves a rural community of 3,500 people in the central part of Vermont. Their annual cash budget is $70,000. What can you do for $70,000? Well, they produce 350 original hours of programming about the lives of their community every year. It's vital local television work, but they don't have the capacity to be able to participate just yet in the benefits that we're describing. That programming output is remarkable, but it's actually a common story that we see in our field, and we need to find a way to be able to bridge the difference to be able to ensure access for all Americans in small communities and large. And just as a side note, Mount Morris is probably exempt from those captioning requirements because of its size. Yet if there's a way for us to provide greater capacity, technical capacity, financial capacity, and human capacity, there's a possibility for everyone to reap the benefit of those vital services. And to my mind, and our organization's mind, that's the goal of the work that we're doing today. Even for larger communities, we believe it's in the public interest to expand services, but not at the expense of vital services themselves. The one thing we don't want to see happen is for communities to reduce necessary expenditures and cut jobs in our field because of increased financial burdens in order to meet what is a vital, legitimate need. We're committed to training and supporting our members to provide more captioning services for the communities that we serve. It's, again, a part of our mission to provide access for information. We invite others to work with us to identify best technical options, to lower cost options in the field so that we can have more practical output, so we can be developing community and volunteer-based services in some instances, so we can find sources of additional monies, be they sponsorship, philanthropic aid, government aid, and actually to work with us to make sure that the dollars we receive from viewers is spent on services for all Americans, to get to the point that Claude raised a moment or two ago. That last point, I think, also needs to be underlined in terms of policy implications for the FCC and for other lawmakers here in Washington. Current industry and FCC interpretations of the Cable Act have tightly restricted the use of PEG fees only to capital costs, not to extension of services to Americans. So they do not support the services which viewers and communities demand. To our mind, that's wrong. And they will not support captioning costs. Just to underline that, a PEG fee collected will not be providing support for captioning costs without compliance and some flexibility in rules. So if we believe these services are vital, we need the flexibility to support them and to make them grow and flourish in our communities. So that said, I want to thank you for the time and the opportunity to join you today.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our panelists. I promised that we would have time for our audience to pose some questions. And we do have a number of questions that have also been emailed to us. If there is anyone in the room who would like to ask a question, if I could ask that you please stand up in the center of the aisle towards the microphone, or raise your hand if you're unable to make it to the microphone in the aisle. While we are waiting for anyone to queue that wants to get to the aisle microphone, I will go ahead and ask our first question. This is a question from Washington State. And the question is coming from Victor Harris. His comment is that he is vexed by Washington State and many other local governments with a sizable population of about 90,000 residents not providing captioning for government broadcasts. State legislature, state meetings, city council meetings, planning commission meetings, and the like. So he is wondering what his options are, and I think maybe Amanda, you might be the best one to respond to that. And because we want to make sure that we have time to get through all of our questions, I'm going to ask that if you would keep your answer brief, and then we can move on to other questions.
So if I understand it, sounds like he's asking what can he do about the fact that these programs that he believes should be captioned are not. I mean, obviously, there's many routes to advocacy. From the perspective of the Department of Justice, we do investigations and bring litigation under the ADA, and so we have a complaint form. You can file a complaint with the Department of Justice. I believe the FCC also does. Our website is ada.gov. And that has really an enormous amount of information about all the work we do. So I would encourage folks to go and look at that website. Individuals have private right of action. There's local disability rights organizations in different communities. There's protection and advocacy organizations across the country. So in terms of, a legal route, I'm an enforcement attorney. That's my perspective, but there's probably other ways to go about encouraging your local government to provide captions as well.
Does anyone else want to chime in from the panel before we move on to our next question? Okay. With that said, thank you. And now we'll turn over to the aisle microphone. And if we could ask that you please introduce yourself as well.
Hi, my name is Tol Kesson. I represent the captioning company 3Play Media, and I wanted to make a couple of comments. Claude, thank you for enlisting all the benefits for all viewers, not just people who are deaf. And I wanted to support that with a study that was produced by the BBC Office of Communications in 2006, which found that 80% of the people that used closed captions that enabled them and used them actually had no hearing disability whatsoever. They did it. They used closed captions for one of the other reasons that you talked about. And also, Mike, I just wanted to, I'm really glad that you brought up the benefit of searchability. I think that's really important. A lot of this content does find its way online these days. And searchability is really something that's increasingly important because organizations are amassing large volumes of video content that's not searchable. It's impossible to search video content, but if it's captioned, those captions can be turned into a searchable form, and you can find exactly what you're looking for. And that becomes very important if you have a very large video library. And in the same capacity with search engine optimization, when you have captions, search engines like Google are able to index that content and get a much deeper and broader understanding of what those videos are about. And there have been multiple studies that show that captioning video increases the views by about 7% because search engines are able to basically produce those videos and search results when they meet the queries. Thank you.
I gather that was more of a comment than a question, and we appreciate that. Thank you. Is there anyone who would like to say anything in response to that before we move on to our other questions? Okay, thank you so much, Noel. And the next question that we have is from Brian Knobloch. Brian's comment is that PEG stations are mostly either government-owned or nonprofit, so they don't have any revenues at all. So 2% of 0 is 0, and they would be exempt. Is that correct? And as a corollary, a follow-up question, he says also, do the revenue exemptions also automatically apply to internet programming, or do you have to reapply for that burdensome exemption? So I'll let Elliot answer that one.
I'll answer the second one first, which is that the categorical exemptions apply to TV programming shown on television only. There are no categorical exemptions for programming shown on the internet, although somebody can apply for for an exemption based upon economic burden. In terms of the 2% exemption, it's not true that there are no revenues because to produce the programming budgets are approved, and the programmers do get revenues based upon budgetary allocations. And so if let's say there's a $2 million budget to produce the programming, then 2% of that would be about $40,000 or something like that to pay for captioning.
Thank you. And did you get to the second question about the internet?
Yeah, I answered that one first.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Elliot. I was looking through my papers here. Do we have anyone else in the room with a question or comment before we go to another one of our emailed questions? Please.
If I could just make a comment. I'm Jim Horwood. I'm an attorney in Washington. I'm also on the board of the Alliance for Community Media. And I believe that the $3 million revenue per channel exemption effectively kicks in and does not require captioning on PEG channels under the FCC regulations. This doesn't reach the question of the ADA requirements, but you were talking about the 2%, but I'm looking at the $3 million per revenue per channel exemption, and doesn't that exempt most, if not all, PEG programming from the FCC requirements?
If a PEG channel had a budget under $3 million, therefore, because it's receiving revenues from the governmental source that's giving it a budget, if the revenues were under $3 million, then you're correct. But in a number of places, the PEG programming channel may be spending, may be receiving $4, $5, $6 million or more to produce programming, in which case then the 2% exemption would apply, for expenditures in excess of 2%.
But that's $3 million per channel, not $3 million for PEG operation, isn't that right?
Right, per channel, right. It's a per channel exemption.
Thank you.
This is Claude. I just would like to say that when the FCC releases an NPRM in the future, we're anxious to see what PEG channels producers have to say about the costs of captioning for those programs, because I am not certain about 2% as a baseline. I think that 2% was a figure that was pulled out of a hat at some point in the past, and I think that we need to be very careful about using that 2% of 2% of the total budget as being used for captioning. I particularly questioned that figure, because back in '96, when this was established, that may have been the case, but then as captioning has continued to ramp up, the captioning for any number of programs, I think that 2%, I may be wrong, but the more programs you caption, the larger the amount of cost as a part of your overall budget you may have. So all that to say that I look forward to getting your feedback later on that as part of a proceeding. Elliot, do you want to respond?
I would just mention that the FCC is looking at a number of the exemptions when the FCC adopted the caption quality rules in February 2014. It issued a notice of proposed rulemaking, and among the questions asked in that notice of proposed rulemaking had to do with a number of the exemptions, and I believe the 2% exemption was one of the issues that we asked for comment on.
Thank you. And I see that we have time for just one more last question in this session, and then I do want to say that we also have a number of written questions, and I'll be sure to pass those on, the ones that have not been answered, over to our subsequent panels as well, so that hopefully, fear not, if you have not heard your question yet by this point, they've not been abandoned. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Suzanne St. John Crane. I'm CEO of Create TV San Jose. And certainly in California, one of our challenges is that when DIVCA, our state franchising, passed in 2006-ish, suddenly we had a lot of restricted capital dollars to play with and no operating. Over 50 centers in our state closed because of that new restriction. And my question to the panel is, we've seen evidence in LA and other large communities where this capital money's coming in, but we're handcuffed in terms of how we can spend it. So is there a path to look at ensuring that money becomes unrestricted so that we can use it towards things like captioning? Now, not every community is in that position, but certainly in California we are. Thank you.
I think that your point raises the question about the paradigm or the example that Claude raised about a local community negotiating with a cable company for benefits that provide services to all the community, all the members of their community. In some 20 plus states around America, there's no ability for communities to do anything to help their residents in those negotiations because of the effects of state franchising. And that's in small places like California, 1/6 of the population. So I would say that if for our partners and friends, if we wish to extend these benefits to all Americans in those states, we actually need to change those restrictive laws, both at the state and the federal level. And that's probably a project that goes beyond the scope of our panel today. But that's, I think, at the nub of the problem that you're describing here, in terms of local communities being hamstrung.
This is Claude. Thank you, Susie. It is interesting. TDI has responded to over 700 requests for a caption exemption for a lot of program producers who plead that they have limited resources and can't afford captioning, but more often than not, the FCC has rejected those requests for exemption, and those entities have had to fulfill their captioning obligations. So the criteria, I think there are 4 points to that criteria, and one of those criteria is if you gather revenues as your own entity, you have to determine what that amount is. And then if you also receive revenues from another entity that we refer to as the parent company or parent entity, how much revenue is at that level? And the FCC is taking a more holistic view on this entity seeking exemption. So in the California state example, imagine the local government has particular revenues for those programs. I think that the state may be considered the parent in that particular scenario. So that's something that we can look into. So Susie, thank you. I think that this panel really deserves a very loud round of applause. Thank you. Thank you for your wonderful remarks this afternoon. We do have, I believe, a 10-minute break scheduled to enjoy the refreshments that have been provided by the Alliance for Community Media, NATOA, and Montgomery County, Maryland. So I'll ask that everyone be back at 2:30. Yes, 2:30, please, and we will get started with our second panel. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone, and welcome back from our break. I hope you all enjoyed the wonderful refreshments that are available here, thanks to our generous sponsors. Now I'd like to turn over to our second panel that's facilitated by Rosaline Crawford. Rosaline is an attorney with the Disability Rights Office in the Consumer Governmental Affairs Bureau here at the FCC.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rosaline Crawford. Thank you, Susie. First, I want to thank again all of the panelists on the first session for the overview of the closed captioning requirements. I think they did a fabulous job. Also, as a reminder that this event is being open captioned webcast along this event that's currently being webcast will also be available on our website along with the agenda and presentation materials and our webpage at www.fcc.gov/events. You can also follow this event currently on Twitter at twitter.com/FCC. To signify your participation in this event via Twitter, you tweet your comment or question and include the hashtag FCCLive. Then click to refresh. Click refresh to view your tweet. Okay, in this session, I know you can tell I'm really familiar with tweeting, can't you? Okay. For this particular session, we're going to assume that a program will be captioned, whether captioning is required or not, and discuss captioning best practices, as well as technical and practical challenges in the PEG environment. Joining me for this discussion are Diane Bernstein, Vice President and Deputy General Counsel at National Cable and Telecommunications Association, Heather York, Vice President of Marketing at VITAC, Carol Studenmund, President of LNS Captioning, Toll Kesson, Vice President of Marketing at 3Play Media, and Christian Vogler, Associate Professor and Director of the Technology Access Program at Gallaudet University. Now, following our brief presentations, we invite you to join the discussion by asking questions and sharing your experiences with respect to best practices, technical and practical challenges in the PEG environment. If you are following this event online, you can participate and ask questions during this event via email at livequestions@fcc.gov. Given our time constraints, and we do have a hard stop at 3:35, we will respond to as many questions as possible during this event. So let's get right down to it. All right, guys. All right, Diane, if you could lead us off, please, by giving us a general overview of the types of programming found on PEG channels and the role of the cable operator in the creation of PEG content. Can you describe for us, from a programmer or industry perspective, some best practices to ensure quality captions? And finally, are there things that a programmer or cable operator can do to ensure quality while captions are being transmitted? So if you take it away.
Thanks, Rosa, and thanks for having me here this afternoon. With all the PEG experts and captioners here, I thought I would focus a little bit on the cable operator's role in this and some of the efforts that NCTA and some of the others in the programming industry undertook to try to address some of the issues that had been raised with respect to caption quality over the course of the last year, and some of the steps that we took, and the captioners can also speak about some of the things that they've done to try to help improve caption quality. So taking it from the top, in terms of the cable operator's role, an important thing to understand about the PEG environment is that cable operators are barred by the Cable Act from exercising any editorial control over the programming that's created on PEG channels. So cable operators, in fact, retransmit PEG programming, but the programming itself is not created by operators, and as Elliot had mentioned, cable operators therefore are not responsible for the presence or absence of captions on PEG programming. Having said that, cable operators receive PEG programming and retransmit it to viewers. So if there is captioning in the PEG programming, that captioning would show up on a viewer's television set if they activate the captions. There's nothing that would make PEG programming different than any other programming in that regard. Cable operators, in fact, under FCC rules, are required to make sure that any programming that comes with captions is in fact transmitted to the viewer with captions intact. So there are no worries there. If captioning is presented in PEG programming, it would come through to the viewer. As mentioned in the earlier panel, we heard about the different types of PEG programming, and as you know, it can be live or pre-recorded, and depending on whether it's live or pre-recorded, that would impact the types of captions that could be provided for that programming. If it's live and it's pre-scripted, and maybe some of the folks who do the PEG programming could say whether that's true or not. In other words, if the programming is read from a teleprompter, for example, like certain local news programming, then one of the methods that can be done at a fairly low rate, cost-wise, is to use what's called electronic newsroom technique captioning. And that's where you actually have a teleprompter that's already typed up is being used as the captions that you would see on the screen. Now, there are some limitations with ENT captioning. I think the FCC is aware of that. The deaf community has had some concerns about that. Because it can't capture speech that's not pre-scripted. So if there are ad-libs, things of that nature, ENT has limitations. But it is one cost-effective way, at least, if there are pre-scripted programs. Otherwise, if it's live programming, as I would expect, much of governmental programming would be, city council meetings and the like, then that would necessitate the use of real-time captioning. And real-time captioning, which the FCC is using here, uses many of the same skills as court reporting, and because of typing and captioning at the same time, as Elliot, I believe, had mentioned earlier, there are some issues with respect to lag time, synchronicity, and just human error. So some of my co-panelists can probably speak to the ways that this is created, but that's one possibility for live programming. Pre-recorded programming can be provided to many of the captioning organizations for the inclusion of captions in the final program, and as Elliot said, because it's not the same instantaneous captioning, offline captioning provides the highest level of quality in terms of being able to actually check to make sure that the captions are spelled well, and in terms of placement and timing. As mentioned, in response to some of the issues related to concerns about ensuring quality captions, the industry came up with a list of best practices designed to address some of these perceived issues. And they had several elements I thought I'd highlight today. First, one of the best practices that programmers can follow, and this would be in lieu of dealing with the FCC specific regulations, is to adhere to the best practices, is that they would have contracts with the caption providers that ensured a certain level of quality. And indeed, part of those caption provider contracts include provisions designed to have ways of measuring the quality of the caption that's being received from the from the captioner's verification of quality standards and training in new or renewed agreements with caption service providers. Best practices also dealt with certain operational best practices that the video programmers agreed to undertake to help try to minimize the number of mistakes with live captioning. Programmers agreed to provide certain preparatory materials to the captioners, things like a list of proper names, for example, to help cut down on spelling errors. So there are things that you can do ahead of time with live captioners to try to improve the quality of the captioning. In addition, there are commercially reasonable efforts to be made to provide captioners with access to a high-quality audio signal, again, to cut down on difficulties in hearing what's going on with live productions. The best practices were also aimed at trying to minimize complaints from consumers by, at the front end, trying to identify problems before they became problems at the consumer's end. So one of the ways the best practices tried to deal with this was through the programmer agreeing to periodically check to make sure that offline captions are present when the program is being produced, monitoring the TV program stream when it leaves the studio to make sure the captions are there. And finally, another element that was important was to make sure that there's coordination between the captioner and the program producer so that if there are problems that are noticed, they can be fixed relatively quickly. Programmers adhering to best practices agreed to provide captioners with the contact who might help resolve any captioning issues that might arise. The programmers were to develop a troubleshooting protocol in case they notice problems, and conduct spot checks after the fact to make sure that any problems that were identified had been resolved. And then lastly, cable operators came up with their own best practices to check a representative sampling of programs, at least annually at the head end, to make sure that their equipment was properly passing through captions, to test a model, set-top box models before they were sent out into the field to ensure that captions could come through, and to maintain customer support to help resolve caption quality issues. And last but not least, I just want to mention that to ensure that these efforts were yielding benefits, the best practices also agreed that the industry would get together with members of the community and others after a year to assess how the quality efforts were going. So, in short, that's kind of the state of the best practices today.
Thank you very much, Diane. That was good. Okay, I'm going to move along to Heather, and I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about real-time captioning, one of the categories that Diane mentioned. Can you tell us what should PEG channels consider when hiring a caption company, and is there particular equipment required to start captioning, and do you have any specific recommendations for PEG programming? And finally, can you talk a little bit about streaming captions via Internet Protocol? I know that's a lot to cover, so if you could do that in 3 to 5 minutes, you'd be doing good.
Fast. Okay, thank you, Rosalind. Thank you, Diane. As we've been talking, I think Elliot brought up the caption quality. Am I good? Closer. Hello? Is that better? The caption quality rules that went into effect in March this year. Diane started off with the rules in place for the programmers, and I'm going to pick up with the real-time caption vendors rules. These are all in Appendix B2, which is taped on my wall and is a good source for anybody looking for quality captions. But if you're looking for a caption provider, the first question would be, how do you measure caption quality? Everybody does it just a little bit different, but everyone who captions for television has a solution and a method for measuring it. The FCC says at a minimum, untranslated words, incorrect words, misspelled words, missing words, and incorrect punctuation that impedes translation should count as errors. That's important. The FCC also says that music lyrics must be included in captions. That's also very important. When Diane mentioned programmers providing prep to captioners, one of the things we ask for is lyrics or names of songs of things that are going to be covered. I don't know how often that gets involved in government programming, but it is a big issue for the caption companies. It also, the FCC ruling says you have to measure your captioners and measure caption quality, but it doesn't put a number as to how often that should be done. It's a good idea to ask your caption company how often and how they measure continuously their captioners. Along those same lines, how are captioners trained? How do you choose which captioners you're going to use for which programming? These are all things that come into play with regard to accuracy and the caption companies. After accuracy, we have synchronicity. How do you measure synchronicity? One of the biggest complaints in live programming is that it is behind the audio too often. The best practices say that synchronicity should be measured by the time the audio arrives at the captioner to the time it arrives back at the station. And the reason it's spelled out that way is because sometimes incorporating the captions into the signal can take an extra 2 to 3 seconds that is not the fault of the captioner. So it's important to find out how your caption company measures synchronicity and how they can ensure that you're up to speed. And third one would be, how do you ensure captions are placed? This is a big issue with programming that you can only hear and can't see. A lot of live programming is national. We can see it. We can move the captions where they need to be. Most municipal programming, we don't see. We don't see Santa Clara's, California's programming. We don't know where the graphics are, and we don't know where to put the captioning. So we ask that the channel tell us whether to put the captioning at the top or the bottom, and we keep our captions there throughout the programming. It's important to think of where you're putting your lower thirds and keep them in the same place. If you have bouncing graphics, something's going to be covered and impede the view of the caption viewer. We also think that it's a good idea to ask how infrastructure supports technical issues. You want to make sure that there's a lot of backup in place. If something's going to go wrong with a phone line, with an IP connection, with a captioner's fingers, most caption companies have backup systems that they can lay out for you, and I think it's really important to ask that up front when you're hiring a caption company. One of the other best practices is to ensure captioners are prepared in advance for programming. This is also important. If you're not going to sit there and do a check before every program, you want to make sure your caption company has systems in place. We have one that has an alarm that goes off 15 minutes before a show is going to air. If the captioner is not checked in for that show, alarms go off and phone calls happen. That's our first line of defense. The second line of defense is a test with the actual station to make sure captions are working. It's not that big a deal, I don't think, in municipal programming, but just ensuring that your captioner is ready to go can become an issue, especially with a lot of live programming on one channel. Another best practice is to have technical discrepancy reporting. Everyone is different here. We keep a technical discrepancy database that records every loss of caption, the reason it occurred, and the reason it won't occur in the future. Something as simple as delayed caption that's commonly blamed on a slow captioner can be anything from like an IP connection to a phone connection to a VPN connection. It can take up to 2 weeks to resolve some of these things that sound very simple. So you want to make sure your caption company not only has the ability to record technical difficulties, but also resolve them at the same time. I think that's most of the best practices. What was your second question? Wait. Not me? Oh, specific recommendations for PEG programming. I was going to say the most important thing for us for PEG programming, and Carol can speak to this also, is booking your time. So you'll have shows that, a meeting can be 2 hours or it can be 10 hours long, depending on how many people are lined up to talk. Captioners are paid by the hour generally. So I think a lot of municipalities get in sort of a boat where they're paying a minimum fee or they're paying somebody to be on standby. And the more accurate you can be on your start and end times, the less money it's going to cost you in the long run. I think that was the main area I had for... What's that? Thank you. Oh, IP captioning. Streaming captions via IP. I think all municipalities stream their programming, and streaming captions, thankfully, is not hard anymore. You just get a caption encoder with 2 outputs, and you can stream your TV captions to one output and your IP captions to another, and it should not be a problem at all. That's about it. Was that 5 minutes?
That was great, Heather. Thank you. Okay. Moving on to Carol. Can you tell us about real-time captioner best practices for captioning PEG channels? And are there things a programmer can do before and during a meeting or event to help the captioner, anything in addition to what's already been said? Does a captioner need to be concerned about any technical challenges in particular? And finally, does captioning serve as an official record for some municipalities, for some meetings and other events that happen during the program? How does captioning relate to making an official transcript of the event? Thank you.
Thank you, Rosaline. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'm not only an owner of a captioning company, but I'm also the chair of the Mount Hood Cable Regulatory Commission in Multnomah County, which gives me a really interesting perspective to look at what we do and how it impacts the community. With regard to live captioner best practices, captioners come basically from the world of court reporting. You go to court reporting school, you learn how to write on a stenography machine at speeds up to at least 225 words a minute with a high degree of accuracy. That involves writing shorthand briefs, brief for city council. You don't write it out on the machine, CITY, COUNCIL. You have a brief for it, and that's how you gain your speed. Most captioners right now have come from the court reporting world, but we're seeing more and more start to come straight to captioning and skipping all that time with lawyers. Captioners are trained not only to write cleanly and accurately for a wide variety of topics and speakers, but also how to display the captions appropriately on the screen and how to handle obscenities and how to keep up with terminology changes and current events. And also the National Court Reporting Association has a certification program, and obtaining and maintaining that certification is a best practice for captioners. Some technical concerns. Each captioner should have backup equipment, including power sources to protect your equipment from power surges, battery backup systems, reliable backup equipment for stenographic machines, computers, modems, and access to high-speed internet service. And this is just the basics. If a captioner has a risk of frequent power outages, a generator is in order. One of our captioners lives in Maine, and every winter she is very glad she has her generator ready to go at a moment's notice. Another best practice for a captioner working with PEG providers is don't go it alone. We know some captioners who are one-person companies who get a contract with a city, and then they have trouble handling the long meetings that go long. And we have one friend in particular who calls us up kind of as her backup. And she'll take unscheduled breaks from her city council meeting to call my coordinator, can you help me out? And that's not a good practice. We work with a team, as does National Captioning Institute and VITAC. We have teams of coordinators who work between the clients for the client issues and also with captioners. Captioners can get sick, power can go down, equipment can fail. The coordinator can put someone new on the meeting. But also the coordinator works with the schedule coordinators for the cities and counties. Our coordinator gets on the list of people who are notified of the schedules so that we know as soon as possible. And we have nice relationships with our various board clerks that we work with who will give us a call and say, oh my word, we have 90 people signed up for this, so please get prepared. And that helps a lot. It's important to remember that captioners are not court reporters. Court reporters, even though we look alike and use the same machine, their job is to get down every word said in a court or in a deposition or other official meeting. These professionals are empowered to ask people to slow down, speak one at a time, and speak up. It's a requirement. Captioners are not able to slow the pace of the captioners in a live format. Our captioner today is not here to give us dirty looks if we start talking fast. That person can't yell at us right now. Slow down. The captioner has to adjust his or her writing to provide clean, readable captions. We often have to face the choice of either trying to fingerspell some long, unexpected name or dropping the long name in order to keep up with the speaker. It's a difficult balance to make, but that's the reality of live events. Preparation is important for the captioners, and in any kind of assignment, preparation is totally important. Imagine asking a famous singer to come and sing songs and have no rehearsal time and not tell them what the songs are before they get there. Even if they're highly talented, it's not going to be the best performance. Captioners need preparation material. We get that through our agendas. We look at the agendas online. We research from that. One of the things we do is we get our clients to send us a list of usual suspects, usual people who will come and speak in front of the council, such as Mary Beth Henry. Her name's easy to write. But there's others, who is the city attorney who comes to council meetings? That may not be the city attorney, but which one should we expect to need to spell the name correctly? Let's see. Regarding whether what we provide is an official record or not, that really is something to be decided by the local government. How do you want to handle these files? The caption, an output file is created when we write, and this can be provided to, say, the city in a variety of formats, from a .txt file to a .srt file. Some meeting platforms, such as Granicus, pull the captions out of the video signal and reposition the data on the web page that displays the meeting video. Once that caption data is pulled from the video signal, the caption data can be archived in the Granicus system. Our company has many clients who use this feature. As soon as the meeting ends, the captions are in the archives, and whether that archive is available to the public or not is decided by the local government. We've seen clients who come to us in the space of providing access to citizens with hearing disabilities, and over time moving into a new space of really appreciating access to the caption files after the meeting. I'd like to share some remarks from Jerry Allen, the Assistant Director of General Services for the City of Beaverton, Oregon, and this is quoting Jerry. The captions are embedded into the video record of every meeting, so they are a permanent part of the record. They aren't considered the official minutes in Beaverton because council still wants typed minutes presented for approval. So every time anyone watches a live stream or chooses to watch a recorded version of the meeting, they can access the captions. This also brings us into ADA compliance with FCC rules regarding streaming to the web, and it helps expand our efforts to be as transparent to our citizenry as possible. He says the true power of the caption files are that they allow us to use our search function in Granicus for every recorded meeting for specific words in City Council, Planning Commission, and Urban Renewal Agency meetings. If a counselor, staff member, or citizen wants to see every time 125th Avenue or the Creekside redevelopment project was discussed in a council meeting, all they need to do is put those words into the keyword search and press search. And then every instance when that word has been mentioned since October 1st of 2007, it will be loaded into the hit list. You don't need to listen to 10 to 20 minutes of video to figure out what was said. It's just all right there in front of you. And it's a very powerful research tool, and our counselors and city staff and concerned citizens find it very valuable when researching or evaluating requests. And I've got comments from Carla Moore-Love, the board clerk of the City of Portland Council. She says, once we receive the document from you, we reformat it into a Word doc, and then we review that with the audio or video recordings for accuracy, and we add speaker names. If the public or city staff need them earlier, they can ask for them. The draft is available almost immediately once we receive them. And yes, we use them as part of our official minutes by combining them with the disposition agenda that council approves. We used to do summary minutes, but we in the city archivist agreed that these are more of a true reflection of what happened at the meeting. And she added a side note, I believe the captioning on the big screen in council has helped attendees who are not hearing impaired but are not able to hear because of our sketchy sound system in council chambers. So as I said, this is something that you need to determine on a local basis. And I just have to throw in one more paragraph. I wanted to share with you a really nice relationship our company has with the immigrant and refugee community of Oregon. Several times a year, people from this community speak before council, including people from Bhutan, Russia, Mexico, Iran, China, Vietnam, and the South Pacific Islands. The organization works with us to provide us not only with the names, but printouts of what the people are going to say, because they know that we may not understand them. And the community depends on reading the captions, open caption, as we have today, at these meetings to understand what's being said. And I always receive a great deal of feedback when I'm there in person providing the captions for those meetings. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kara. That was great. Okay, on to Toll. Can you review some of the responsibilities of offline captioners to ensure verbatim captioning on pre-recorded programming? And how do IP, Internet Protocol requirements, play in this market?
Great. Thanks, Rosaline. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I wanted to talk about this in two parts. The first part is in terms of the creation of captions, and the second part has to do with caption formats and delivery. So the first part really sort of a lot of this sort of mirrors the quality requirements that Elliot Greenwell talked about in the previous session. But I wanted to talk about these through the lens of a captioning provider. So one part of this is accuracy and completeness. So the goal should be to provide at least 99% verbatim accuracy, which means obviously correct spelling, grammar, and punctuation. Captions should cover the entirety of the program, including going all the way through the credits and any scenes that might appear after the credits. The second part of it is consistency, so uniform style, grammar, and presentation of all the captioning features, as well as standards for transcribing complex content. For example, if you have a math formula that is described, that needs to be represented in captions in a very specific, standardized way. And same is true for a chemical equation. So these are things that are very important to maintain consistency across captions. The next part is clarity. So this means really sort of that we need to have a complete textual representation of the audio. So that includes speaker identification, music, and sound effects when they're integral to the plot. Preservation of the tone. So, for example, if somebody's whispering or yelling, that's something that should be denoted. And really, just sort of in general, it's important to have sort of an equivalent experience for someone who is relying on the captions. And that can mean a lot of subtle things. But one example is that the captioner should really put themselves in the shoes of the viewer. One example is to not give away plot points. So if let's say there's a scene where somebody's knocking on the door, but as the viewer, you're not supposed to know who that person is. Well, the captioner, even if the captioner does know who that person is, they should not identify that person in the speaker identification. So the captioner really needs to be on top of what's happening in the plot line of the program. And the last part there is readability. So this covers the synchronization of the audio, which really for offline post-production captioning really needs to be perfect. It needs to be spot on. There's really no reason why it isn't. Each caption frame should be displayed long enough, but not longer. So what happens sometimes if there's a period of silence after a caption frame, you'll see that caption frame just lingers on for that whole length of time, and that's not acceptable because that could be confusing. And then lastly, the caption frame should not obscure any other critical content that's on screen. So if necessary, the caption frame needs to be relocated to the top of the screen or somewhere else where it's not obscuring that critical content. The second part relates to the caption formats and delivery, and this is really particularly important for content that makes its way online, as a lot of broadcast content does these days. So the first part there has to do with standard formats. So for IP video, CA 608-708 should be converted to either SCC or SMPTE time text. Both of those are standard formats that have been agreed on and documented in the EMA captioning standards. WebVTT is also it's an emerging HTML5 caption format that's rapidly becoming the standard for web media. Frame rate is another consideration. So television in North America, the frame rate for it is 29.97 frames per second. But internet video delivery supports a variety of frame rates. And so what you have to do is you have to reconfigure the frame rate in order to match the internet IP delivery. So frames have to be either stretched or shrunk. But this can be a challenge if you don't know what the original frame rate was, or if the video has been transcoded into a slightly different frame rate. And so the best practice there is to include the frame rate of the video in the metadata of the caption file. And for SCC files, it's important to also include whether the time code is drop frame or non-drop frame. Otherwise, you'll probably end up having lead or lag with the captions. They're just not going to follow the video. The other part is caption certification. So if a video does not have captions, there should be a certification that's included in the avails and also the metadata of the caption file. And this is the EMA certification. There's a checklist of you need to check off the reason why this particular video does not require captions. And then the last part is has to do with web video player requirements. So there's an FCC rule that took effect in January 1st of 2014 that applies to programming that aired on television with captions, and it requires if that programming is also being published on the internet, then that web player needs to provide end users with certain features. So end users need to be able to control the font type, the size, the background color, the opacity, and the character edge style. So they need to have those controls that are available on video players such as YouTube and other types of players. Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tol. Well, that's a lot of information and highly technical for some of us in the room, but I think incredibly valuable. So thank you very much. All right, Christian, last but not least, and I know that you've got to be out of here at 3:35, so we're going to turn it over to you. And I wanted to ask you specifically if you can describe for us what's important to consumers with respect to closed caption quality and best practices. And can you give us some examples of how captions might not be effective, that they actually don't do what they're supposed to do? From a consumer's perspective.
Sure. Hello, and thank you for the invitation to join you this afternoon. First of all, I think there's a big difference between the industry perspective and the consumer perspective. The industry is focusing a lot on the process, And we as consumers are focused more on the product, the final outcome. When you are looking at the screen, what you see there is really what we as consumers are looking for. And all of the best practices are certainly important. But even if you follow those best practices, there's still the potential for, on the consumer's end, for it not to all work out. So the way I see it, the most important thing is usability, the usability of those captions. And for closed captioning, what we mean there is, can we easily read the captions? Can we easily understand what is being said? I understand that people speak quickly. And so in some cases, that means that you've got captions that are appearing appropriately quickly as well. And you can try to read, but you can also understand that that obligation is then falling on the consumer. And those little things can have an impact ultimately on how we are reading the captions. And that's what makes a big difference between easy to read, usable captions and captions that are completely unusable. In general, with offline captions, and as this has already been mentioned by my other panelists, it's very important to make sure that the captions show up, are readable for the entirety of the program, and that you're able to read the entirety of that caption before it disappears. And I've sometimes seen some mistakes made there as well, where the caption simply appears very briefly on the screen. For example, words like yes, which may just appear very, very briefly and then disappear for less than a microsecond. And that happens once in a while, and you really have to be paying attention to the speed of those captions. You also have to attend to ensuring those captions are going to be where the consumer is expecting them to be. So, for example, if you have one individual talking and I'm expecting the captions to be on that side of the screen that is assigned to that individual, if then the captions end up moved to the other side of the screen, but I'm not expecting that, I'm now looking in the wrong place, and as I move to look at the other side of the screen, I've potentially missed information in the interim. And that's an example that isn't described in the best practices, but is still important for us to note. Now, live captioning is more worrisome. We have people who are talking fast, and captioners are doing their best to get the content out on the screen. And I'm doing my best to read quickly so that I can continue to keep up. It makes smoothness much more critical. The readability of those captions on the screen need to be as easy to read as possible to keep up with that speed. So some common examples of how this can not work out is sometimes the caption line shows up line by line, but you've got the lines bumping in ways that are jarring to the reader. So you're able to read what isn't a full sentence, and you're waiting for the next chunk of information that isn't a full sentence to come in, as opposed to captions that are coming up word by word, which are sometimes easier to read, so that you can naturally read your way through the text that is coming in, rather than having a whole chunk of text, that whole line of text show up at one time. If you're reading live captions as a consumer, it requires a lot of your attention. So you have less time to look at the image and the video that's being displayed on the screen as well. So there has to be a balance struck between reading speed and time for individuals to look at other things that are on the screen and to look at the video. I don't have any hard data on that, but I know that there are studies out there that have investigated the cognitive burden on an individual to move back and forth between the visual image on the screen and the captions. And I'd be interested to see the results of those studies and to look at what can be done to optimize that experience, that balance between the captioning and access to the visual medium. Along those same lines, it is also very important not to have the captions disappear too quickly. So if you have 2 or 3 lines of text on the screen and they're rolling up, sometimes I've seen it happen that as lines roll up, you see the first line disappear. And so you should have access to that entire chunk, multiple lines, in order to be able to put it all together cohesively, rather than losing what you had read just a fraction of a second ago as you're getting more information. So you're losing some of the content and the context. It's very important to retain as much as we can that ability to look back inside the captions to be able to continually connect the dots. Another thing I've seen that is not mentioned in the best practices, but it's a terrible situation, but sometimes does happen, when you have live captioning, you have 2 or 3 words come in at a time. And it's impossible to read. 2 or 3 words. And I suspect the reason behind that is there's an issue in conversion from live captions to IP captions that sometimes happens, and so that causes this sort of jarring appearance of the captions. They come in multiple words at a time. That process still needs more attention to ensure that you're not destroying the usability of those captions for the consumer. Moving into IP captioning, I strongly recommend that we don't try to reinvent the wheel. And what I mean by that is that I see a lot of web pages that provide their own video players. And often what happens is those video players are buggy in their captions. And there are a couple websites that I watch where their website isn't remembering my settings for captioning, so it's not retaining my preference. There are some video players that have a bad default for font and color and size. Again, making it very difficult for me to read. So every time I want to watch a video that's using that player, I have to go back to adjust it again and again. It's important to have some reasonable default for the caption settings. Another example, I've seen a video player, when I'm watching it on the computer, it's working perfectly fine, and on a mobile device, the captions are not there. Again, all of the technical issues that I've described have been resolved. For example, Toll mentioned WebVTT. YouTube already supports that. There are some other high-quality video players that are already supporting that, and they've done all of that hard work to support all of those features appropriately, and they have already have a number of them out there from which one could choose to decide which one to use to display video on a website. So there's no reason to rewrite a video player from scratch. You're wasting money, and what ultimately you're doing is a worse job than some of these products that have been worked on over the course of a number of years. And I'm hoping that I have not forgotten anything important.
Thank you so much, Christian. I really appreciate your input. Okay, we've come to that last 10 minutes of our session here for questions. So if you have questions and you're here in the room, if you'd be so kind as to go to the microphone in the middle. Certainly if there's anything that we've said or presented here that you'd like to follow up on, please share your questions with us. Also, or if you have personal or professional experiences that you would like to share with us to add to this discussion, we certainly welcome that too. For folks who are watching online, you can certainly send your questions in, and we've been collecting some of them here. But please send your questions in or comments through the email. I do have one question here that I'm going to throw back to Heather. I know Heather. So you mentioned something that this is a message from Christopher Edwards, and the question is: so captioning should be over or not over lower thirds?
Well, that's an easy one.
Okay, good.
Captioning should not be over lower third graphics ever. And it's one of the new best practices. It gets tricky when you have lower thirds and also graphics on the left-hand side of your screen. You end up with a 20-character caption that can be too fast, to Christian's point. But yeah, don't cover your lower thirds.
Thank you very much. And you have a question here. If you'd identify yourself, please, and for the audience, and ask your question.
Hi, Mitsuko Herrera from Montgomery County, Maryland, which is adjacent to Washington, D.C. Thank you again for the information. We do closed caption all of our programming, but I learned some interesting tips and some improvements. Question I had was for Diane Bernstein. We helped put together a filing noting from about 70 different PEG organizations who have closed caption programs. And for some of them, some cable operators, I get your point that the captioning in the program is something that's transmitted to you. But in some cases, the local government is willing to caption the programming and to provide a description of it. And on the on-screen guide, you would have a symbol that appeared for CC, which would identify the program as being closed captioned. But not all cable operators put that information on the on-screen guide. So would NCTA commit to working to ensure that for programs that are closed captioned, that their program description and that closed caption identifier appear on their on-screen guide?
Thanks. I think that it really depends on the particular situation. As we have explained in the context of the guide proceeding at the FCC, there are some very unique things about the way local PEG programming is provided to cable operators, and that information gets into a guide that's unique to PEG that makes it very challenging to include certain specific information. But whether it works in a particular franchise area or not is probably something that would be resolved at the local level.
I guess I would just add on that particularly when you look at the cable industry and the move that you're making on the guide, particularly to go to the search functionality, that finding ways to include local programming in those national platforms is going to be something very important. And I know that there are many people in this room who would be willing to work with you to come up with standards that other people can use that help address some of those technical challenges. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, I have another question here, and it's open to anybody who would like to try to answer it. The question is, again, from Chris Edwards, and it says, we play music over our bulletin board programming. Do these lyrics need to be captioned? If so, how can we do this? Does anybody want to take a stab at that one? Or if Elliot is in the room, if you would like to.
Okay. All right. Oh, good. Okay. Basically, the FCC captioning order from February 2014 does require that lyrics to programs be captioned. And now, there is, of course, the categorical exemption for primarily textual programming. So if what you mean by bulletin board programming, is this really textual programming and there's an occasional background music? Is that what is bulletin board programming?
I would interpret it to mean that it's textual information and it's accompanied by music that in fact has lyrics as opposed to music without lyrics.
Well, the exemption is written primarily textual programming. So, if that's the case, then the exemption would apply
For the textual programming, but what about for the music with the lyrics?
And is that? I think we'd have to look at this on a case-by-case basis. But it sounds like if this is just background music, then probably the program would come under the exemption of no captioning. Just like if there are snippets of English in a German program, the snippets of English don't need to be captioned when it's primarily a foreign language program.
Thank you, Elliot. Did you have something to add to that? And if so, would you come to the microphone?
Hello, I'm Helen with Watertown Cable Access, and just to speak to bulletin board, our bulletin board systems have events, community events, like the senior centers hosting a barbecue, or next town council meeting is going to be November 24th, something to that degree. But underneath that bulletin, we're playing music just so it's not silent all the time. So that's what we mean by bulletin board.
Thank you very much. Christian, do you have something to add?
I would like to add something from the perspective of a consumer. If there is music, I want to know when there's music. I would also want to know what the words are as a consumer. So I realize that if you have text on the screen and that could potentially conflict with captioning of the lyrics, then that is a challenge. But I personally would like to have the option, knowing that it is there, to choose one or the other.
Thank you, Christian. Hey, I have another question that's come in from Victor Harris, and he says, I'm concerned about ownership of City Council minutes. I'm told by some the minutes must be adopted and can be withheld from the archives until that date, effectively excluding deaf and hard of hearing for the duration, while hearing people can review streamed material immediately without captions. The caption should always be linked with the video regardless. Can you clarify? Is there anybody on the panel who has experience with this kind of issue? And anybody in the audience who'd like to speak with that? Yes, if you would come to the microphone in the middle, please. Thank you. Gerard, would you give me a hand? Thank you.
My name is Carl Richardson. I'm the ADA coordinator for the State House. I'm also on the advisory council for the City of Boston for persons with disabilities. And we caption our City Council meetings. But we won't use the transcript as official minute right away. But we don't take the captions away from the video. You know what I mean? The minutes still have to be voted and be formally adopted, but we don't take the captions away from the video. So if they're watching the video, they are linked to the video. They're just not considered a formal record or formal minutes until voted.
Thank you very much. And Carol, do you have something to add?
I recall that Mr. Harris asked a question in the last panel, and I believe he lives in a city that doesn't have captions. So that might be part of the problem for him, is that he doesn't have access at all. And waiting for the minutes is just delayed access for him. That's what I'm guessing.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Yes, my name's Mike Johnson with Northwest Community Television in the Twin Cities. We serve 9 municipalities, and I want to thank the FCC for hosting this, and it's just nice to see a full room of PEG centers throughout the country represented. I'm wondering, Elliot was talking about the financial threshold of $3 million per channel. Well, I'm here to tell you right now that most PEG centers are not operating $3 million channels. So with that said, what I'm wondering, because I think most of these people in the room who are operating PEG centers would love to do captioning. So if money is the issue and you can't get the money to do it, where do you see the technology headed? This goes out to the entire panel here, and I understand we have captioning companies that I'm looking at right now. Do you ever see a time where technology will solve this issue on a very low-cost way? I mean, you look at YouTube now, and you have, I believe, nuanced captioning being used, and it has improved over the years, but do you see the technology, where is it going in the next couple of years?
Carol?
Can I jump in on that one? I'd like to jump in on that one because as a caption provider, I feel the pull from my clients who want the prices to go down, and yet the pull from the consumers who want the quality to keep going up. And that's just a difficult place for the caption company to be. A lot of prices for local network affiliates have just dropped through the floor in the last few years, and people have left the field because they won't work for those rates. And that's no way for us to provide improved quality for the folks in the hearing disabled community. I would just listen to what Amanda and Elliot told you about, go to the parent and just keep going up the chain to where the money is and how the ADA is reviewed in terms of what's reasonable.
Yeah, I could add a little bit to that. So there are a lot of new technologies and innovations being created. First of all, speech recognition is the big one. YouTube has auto captioning, and speech recognition is used pretty widely. And it has made some improvements, but it's a little bit, honestly, it's a little bit overhyped. We use speech recognition in our captioning, so the way that our process works is we do put video, when we receive video, we put it through speech recognition, which gets it to a point where it's about 80% accurate. But then we do have to have professional transcriptionists who go through and clean up the mistakes left behind by the computer. But even 80% accuracy, that means that 1 out of 5 words are wrong. And the thing about speech recognition is that when it's wrong, it's usually wrong spectacularly. So you really need to have human involvement. And as far as where it's going in the next few years, this particular part of speech recognition is not going anywhere. It's basically going to be making marginal improvements, but in terms of whether speech recognition will get to the point where humans are not required at all, probably not in our lifetimes, unfortunately. I think that humans will still need to be involved. But we have also developed a lot of other technologies which have brought the costs down. For example, we have an automated transcript alignment process where if you just have a transcript but no time codes, you can upload that along with the video, and we'll synchronize the two and create closed captions automatically. We have a technology that we developed for doing placement. So what we'll do is instead of manually placing the captions on the screen to prevent obscuring critical graphics and other text, we analyze the pixels on each frame, and if we identify that in the lower third the captions would obscure critical content, we'll automatically move the captions to another part of the screen. So that's an automated process which is very cost effective. We've developed another technology for clip captioning. This is something that's going to be increasingly important with the new legislation. What this technology allows you to do is to automatically create captions for video clips in the case where you already have captions for the full-length programming. So that's something that happens automatically very quickly, and it's very cost-effective. So those are sort of the directions where some of the innovation is going in. But I think in terms of just the pure raw transcription and captioning, unfortunately, from our vantage point, humans will need to be involved for a long time. Yeah.
And Christian, you had something else?
Yes, I would like to add that I mostly agree with you, Toll, but I remember back in the 90s, I'm old enough to remember the 90s, and speech recognition was advertised as the next big thing. It was awful. It was overly imagined, and people were building it into consumer electronics. But now we're 25 years later, and we're starting to see it everywhere, so it is a big step. I am somewhat optimistic, and we are seeing improvement incrementally. I'm willing to bet you, Toll, that in our lifetimes we will see a large improvement, and not necessarily in the near future, but over the course of a number of years. However, please do not mention YouTube as a good example. That sends red flags flying all over the place.
Thank you, Christian. Okay, we've run out of time for this session. I believe we're scheduled to have a short, quick break now, and then return for the final session, which I think may help address some of the cost and caption production issues that y'all have been waiting to hear about. So thank you so much, and a big hand for our panel.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. If we could ask everyone to take a seat, we're going to get started. Welcome back, everyone, to our third panel of this afternoon session and for the day. It has been really exciting all afternoon, and I'm looking forward to this panel. I'll introduce first our facilitator for this last panel, Greg Leibach, who is the Chief of the Disability Rights Office, or DRO, under the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau here at the Commission. Thank you, Susie. Good afternoon, everyone. Here we are at our third and final session of today, and last but certainly not least, with 5 distinguished panelists here ready to share their thoughts, experience, and wisdom with all of us. First of all, we want to talk about, our first panel we talked about the obligation to caption, our second panel we talked about best practices, and now here we find ourselves at our third, talking about creative thinking for solutions for captioning of this type of content in different settings. Providing captioning for PEG channels that are effective and achieving effective communication in a number of different ways. We've talked through some of the challenges that range from funding issues to meeting quality standards, to meeting consumers' expectation. All of those challenges exist, and at the same time, we want to make sure that we emphasize some of the solutions that we can implement to effectively implement captioning to consumers' satisfaction and in compliance with all of the requirements incumbent on these programs. But first, I will introduce our panelists. Jason Barnett is immediately to my left, the president and CEO of Flarion and conduct a voluntary captioning case study. In the gubernatorial 30 debates. Second, we have Steve Brunsberg. He is Operations and Production Manager at the St. Paul Neighborhood Network. Third, we have Donna Keating, Media Services Manager and Executive Producer for County Cable Montgomery. Fourth, Steve Traylor, Executive Director, the National Association of Telecommunications Officers and Advisors. And last but not least, Carl Richardson, Americans with Disabilities Act Coordinator for the Massachusetts State House and a member of the Mayor's Commission for Persons with Disabilities in the City of Boston. The format is the same as our previous panels. For those of you who are watching over webcast, you can send your questions or comments to livequestions@fcc.gov. And we will give priority to those who are here in person in the audience. And once we've exhausted those questions, move over to our email or internet-based questions. And with time marching on, I think we'll get started with Jason.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me. And as I said, I'm Jason Barnett. And what I'm going to be talking about today is the work that I did with a previous organization that I founded and was the executive director of, and that's the uptake.org. And that was an online video news service. We would live stream all sorts of events, civic events, public events, political events. In the capacity here today, I'm going to using the example of the 2010 gubernatorial debates that we live streamed. I believe it was somewhere around 20 gubernatorial debates and another 10 or so debates that electoral season from other elections, other races. But what we did is my PowerPoint up? There we go. So that's me, information there. And so like I said, in 2010, we live streamed these debates, and we did this through our staff and our volunteers. we would then transcribe and closed caption those within a day of the production of those all through volunteer work. And by what we would do, I'm going to use YouTube as an example. Sorry, the last panel, but what we would push our video through YouTube through their closed captioning service. Then we would use the volunteers to bring it up to 100% accuracy. And when you hear the word volunteer, the assumption is free, and that's a big misconception. Volunteers take a lot of labor to organize and make things accurate, but it is considerably cheaper. And so we were able to close caption every single one of our debates and have those things done and online within a day of the production of that live stream. It was very simple. Like I said, we use YouTube and volunteers. We would train the volunteers. We would tell them what we wanted, and they would watch the videos and follow the closed captioning service that YouTube provided, and just fix and correct the errors. The perks. The number one reason we did this was the access reason. We believed it was the right thing to do. As part of some of our staff had family members who needed these services. We believed very strongly that was the right thing to do. But we also had very practical concerns. We know the power of search. And our YouTube channel, was our single largest point for people to consume our content. And adding the full transcriptions and the captioning to our videos increased the viewership pretty dramatically. We realized by winning this award from this the deaf, blind, and hard of hearing community in Minnesota, what actually the numbers were. And we didn't know going into it that 10 to 15% of the population in Minnesota, needed these services. We didn't know that going in, but we sure found out afterwards because that community came out to thank us pretty strongly. We believe that this service is giving a richer content. So you're able to, if you don't have time to watch these debates, you can read them. And a lot of our audience actually would read the debates, even if they didn't have to. They preferred that option. And so we would, on our webpage, we would have the video, and we would also have the full transcription. And there's revenue. So our YouTube channel produced a lot of revenue for us, sometimes up to $50,000 a year. And having these features, the videos with the transcriptions, with the closed captioning, the search advantages, all those things actually ended up becoming hard dollars. And for a very small organization, you're talking about these $3 million budgets. Boy, I wish. Our budget would range from $150,000 a year to maybe $350,000 a year, depending on how much money I would raise. And so we were a tiny, scrappy organization that not only covered stuff in Minnesota, but we live streamed the climate talks in 2009 in Copenhagen, and we live streamed a lot of political stuff from around the country during the 2008 presidential cycle. And so we get around and did a lot of live streaming early on, but we found that this point to captioning and transcription is not only it's a value we believe in, and so we want to have it done, but we actually found it relatively easy to execute. And you have to find the right volunteers, and you have to find the right community. But most of the people here are in PEG stations, and you're about community, and you're about engaging with these people, and you're about giving them access. And so it's very easy, and I'm using that word a little loosely because volunteer work is not easy, but it's part of your mission to actually work with your community. Those community may want to give something back, and if they're willing to give back time and reading and verifying the transcriptions of some of the video you're doing, there's people in your community that are willing to do that, and you just have to find them and train them. You still have to verify the work, and so that isn't free. So that's me in a short. I'd be happy to ask any questions later, but again, thanks for inviting me.
Excellent. Very interesting thinking out of the box there to provide the captions in a different way. And I do have a follow-up question for you. How often in providing programs in that particular arrangement through YouTube, as you described, as a way of capturing the voice and transcribing that and then uploading that online, how often was that done as part of that?
I believe, and again, like I left this organization a year ago, and I haven't. Again, I'm starting another startup, and so I've been very focused on my new company. But I believe we still do this to every video that we produce, and if that's at one of the debates, or if that's a produced video, or a live. The only videos we don't do this for are the live streaming of the Minnesota legislature, which is already provided closed captioning for. So we do this for everything, and through the same service.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying that, Jason. And next, Steve Brunsberg.
Thanks for the opportunity. I can't read with my glasses on. So I'm production and facility manager at St. Paul Neighborhood Network in St. Paul, Minnesota. Go Vikings. I've been with SPNN for about 20 years, so I've had the opportunity to do a lot of different things, mostly on the production side, equipment, facility. I'm not really an engineer, but I do a lot of work sort of that you might call engineering. I've been able to do several kinds of projects that include closed or open captioning or subtitling. And there's a lot of overlap between the workflow for creating subtitles or for alternately creating closed captions. We've done a lot of work on multilingual projects in St. Paul for a variety of immigrant and refugee populations, so notably the Hmong population, the Somali population, and some others. And we've done some work in ASL as well, which was interesting. I'm going to briefly describe my experience with real-time captioning and also with some offline captioning. And by the way, St. Paul Neighborhood Network, we currently have 5 channels. We're currently standard definition. We're losing a channel under the terms of our new franchise, and we hope to gain an HD channel and then eventually, hopefully, all HD. But we have one channel that is our staff productions, and then 2 public access channels, and an educational/youth channel. In terms of real-time captioning, one of the things we get to do by being in the city of St. Paul is get involved in some government-related projects. It's the state capitol. So we have a partnership with a public television station in western Minnesota that produces a live legislative call-in show once a week, and it's closed captioned. It originates in our studio, and I supervise the technology and the crew, and it goes out to other stations in the state, mostly live in real time. So I've had some exposure with the process for real-time captioning and some of its drawbacks. And I want to say that closed captioning for television, especially the older 608 standard, it's a pretty arcane technology. I mean, it involves the telephone technology, old-fashioned, POTS telephone technology. It has to be backwards compatible with analog television, line 21, and there's a limitation on how much data can fit into a certain length of time in the video, and a lot of you know that, but there are some complications. The closed caption encoder has a modem built into it that's pretty old-fashioned, but we still might be concerned with the baud rate and parity and some things that some of us haven't had to really worry about with computers for quite a long time. Anyway, it works very well, and it's very efficient. I think one of the reasons that people use real-time captioning is it's also pretty foolproof. It's not perfect, but once you caption a program using a real-time method, the caption data is married to the video file, or the tape if you're still using tape. And in the days when we were producing some caption programs in an offline fashion, there were some very particular and kind of arcane problems that would come up trying to marry the caption data to the file or the tape, or trying to get a particular machine to pass that data along rather than strip it out. So some of the things that we've done that are offline captioned, we've been able to do some partnership programs. About 8 years ago, we did a program in partnership with some other organizations. It was funded, I want to say, by the Benton Foundation, and it was a public health outreach project specifically for the Somali population. We did both captioning and subtitling on that, and we were able to take some funds from that project, purchase at that time a pretty expensive piece of software for doing offline captions, and we used that quite a bit. We used it for some other projects as well. Not a friendly piece of software, and especially if you're not doing, if you don't have a workflow of doing captions on a daily basis, I think it's important to note that it's there are some complexities to it, and it's not necessarily a simple process. So some of the other agencies that we've worked with, and I've touched base with some people, and I'll pass along some comments. We've worked with the Minnesota Services for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, as well as the Commission of Deaf, Blind, and Hard of Hearing Minnesotans. We got some very thoughtful comments from the chair of that organization. We've done a lot of work with ECHO Minnesota, which is a multilingual community health outreach program where, again, we're involved in translations as well as subtitling and captioning. We're doing a documentary now where we're transcribing and translating captioning as well, and then some programs for the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. And they feel strongly that anything that we produce in conjunction with them needs to be captioned, and for good reason. And I've got some thoughtful comments from the communications officer from that department that I'll pass along. How am I doing for time? Okay.
I think you have a few more minutes.
Okay. All right. So I touched base with a couple of the companies that I know we've been using for real-time captioning. One of them, Company A, they charge about $350 for the first hour. That's, depending on how you look at it, that's pretty economical. And of course, when you're done, you're done. And then $175 for the next hour and so forth. Another company costs a little less. They have a different model. Their range might be from $100 an hour up to $250 an hour. And if you had a particular contract with them or you had a particular volume of work, you could negotiate a reasonable rate, which makes sense to me. But that still can be a considerable expense for a PEG center. And so my little production department, we're contractually obligated to produce about 15 hours of original programming a month. If we were to use real-time captioning for all of that programming as one model, I mean, that could certainly cost over $15,000 a year. And that's probably an understatement. I think, there was a comment, some questions about what can we call it, artificial intelligence, or the ability for computers to sort of automatically translate to text. And I note that Adobe has kind of put it aside for the moment. We use Adobe Premiere and other Adobe software for editing, and they've improved their closed captioning features, and I like what they're doing, so that now if you have the Adobe Premiere software, you could prepare captions and adjust them right in the application, and you couldn't do that a few versions back. But I see that they've taken the speech-to-text function out of the newest version, which is the Creative Cloud version. I think that they're unsatisfied with the progress of the software. It's just not progressing fast enough. I think the last thing I want to say is there may be some relatively inexpensive solutions for closed captioning, but there's always a trade-off between either spending some money or spending some time, and staff time is often something that's at a premium for stations with smaller staffs. A couple of trends that we're seeing that don't help are some smaller operating budgets that we're seeing after our recent franchise agreement. And the last thing I'll say is that while we certainly see the value, there's a lot of things that we're trying to do as we do productions, and the tools that we've got extremely powerful tools now to do media production with, and they're amazing, but they don't necessarily speed up the process. And so 10, 15 years ago, we may have gone out, shot an event, come back, put a few titles on it, boom, it's done. As producers now and community television practitioners, we perceive more things that we can do. So, for instance, I perceive that I can do some audio sweetening. I'll do that. I feel an obligation to create a version for the web, to maybe make DVD copies, to edit a shorter version of something. And as time goes on, we've developed a host of things that we think we should do because we can do them. And ironically, those things don't take less time necessarily because of the tools that we have.
Thank you, Steve. I did not realize that both you and Jason are from Minnesota, so we have some Viking representatives here. There was a quick follow-up from someone who is watching us over the webcast with a question for you, Steve, that I'm hoping you can answer quickly. The question was, which offline captioning software program were you referring to earlier?
So, my little production department works on Windows, and I think if you're working on Mac or Windows, there's different choices. We were using Auto Caption, which is specifically made for Windows, and so And I think, and that's several years old. I think that the choices are getting easier to use, and actually you can do a lot of that work in free applications, or you could do much of the same work now in Adobe Premiere, I think.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Next, we will move on to Donna.
Hi, I'm Donna Keating. I'd like to thank Claude for giving Montgomery County a shout out. We have been doing closed captioning since the year 2000. So I am pleased to say that we've been doing this for 15 years, and we have seen quite a number of changes. In the year 2008, we started closed captioning our programming in Spanish as well. Closed captioning is extremely important to us in Montgomery County. As Claude alluded to, it's important because we believe it expands public participation. Our residents, our businesses, and even our visitors are important to us. So we want them to know the opportunities that are available in Montgomery County. We want them to know what our elected officials are doing. We want them to know about the programs and services that are available. So we also believe that it facilitates two-way communication. If you know what is happening in your community, you can participate. So for us, it is extremely important. We're talking about resources here as well. There were times when we had some lean years, and under Mitzi's leadership, we had to go and battle, quite honestly, to keep our resources for closed captioning. But we fell back on, we say our mission is to involve our residents, visitors, and our businesses. Well, then this is how you do it in Montgomery County. So we do everything, including emergency announcements. A couple of years back, you all may remember the H1N1 virus. And we had an emergency press event, and that was closed captioned. So if it is a live event, if it is our inauguration, if it is the county executive, if it is a town hall meeting, whether that be with youth or whether with those of us who are on the other side of being classified as youth, we will close caption it. So we close caption 100% of our programming, I'm proud to say. We even close caption a small number of our PSAs. What are low-cost free solutions? Free is an interesting word because I believe nothing in life is free. In Montgomery County, we did negotiate a low-cost contract with National Captioning Institute. They are our current contractors. That contract is also available to our other E&G partners. So our educational system will close caption programming. They close caption their board meetings. They have something called Homework Hotline, and that is available for students in Montgomery County. That is closed captioned. Some of the services that are also available, we do pop-on captioning, foreign language subtitling, and web media caption encoding. So we try and provide the gambit. All of our content is available on the internet through our social media websites, and that is closed captioned as well. With YouTube, and we do use YouTube, what staff does, however, is staff will go and they will go back and they will correct those mistakes because there are a lot of mistakes with YouTube, but we monitor our closed captioning to make sure that it is as correct as humanly possible. We do work with our closed captioners. We provide dictionaries. It was mentioned earlier. We've got some interesting spellings of some of our streets in Montgomery County, so we make sure that our captioners are aware of what those things are. We have some interesting, the gentleman mentioned, some of our policies are rather obtuse, and so we try and make sure that everyone can understand what those issues are. We provide scripts when possible so that it becomes easier. We also closed caption our programming as it is being digitized into our server. That helps reduce costs. It also helps with timeliness, as opposed to having to send our content out and then bring it back in. It is closed captioned as it is being digitized. We have 2 Everett HD caption encoders, 4 telephone lines, and 2 lines for audio. We have 800 lines and local lines, and that was an effort to reduce cost. We do test, as someone mentioned, we test on a daily basis to make sure that our closed caption lines are working. We had some issues where we had some issues, and so every time that we have an issue, we go back and we work with our partners, and I will say NCI, they are our partners. We work together to address our technical issues, and we resolve them rather quickly. We also have standing times for our programming. So we know on Wednesday morning that we are closed captioning Spanish, and also on Friday afternoons we are closed captioning Spanish, so they can make their Spanish captioners available. If new services are needed, our contract calls for 24-hour notice. Obviously, we do our best to give them more notice, but we are able to work with their staff to provide services. In terms of cost, there's also the do-it-yourself option, but there is a cost associated with that. You do have to train people to make sure that they understand and how to place the captions. They understand the language that are being used. I did do some searching to find out sources. There is the Department of Education. You do have to delve in to find that, but it is available. And I know that Montgomery County Public Schools is using something called amara.com, and that is, I believe, amara.com. And they are very happy with it. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Donna. Very informative. Next time I'm house hunting, I'm in Maryland, so I will definitely look at Montgomery County with all that in mind. I would like to highlight one particular point about making emergency information on television accessible, and that is categorized under Section 79.2. And that is an FCC requirement that regardless of cost, regardless of type of entity, etc., it does not fall under any of those exemptions in the event of broadcasting emergency information. So any emergency information on television must be made accessible through caption. So I just wanted to make sure to highlight that point before we move forward. Next we have Steve Traylor. Steve?
Well, thank you. And on behalf of NATOA, I'd like to thank the FCC for putting this workshop together. I have to admit, though, when I got the email and found out what panel I was put on dealing with solutions, I was really concerned because that was the really hard one. The first panel is easy. Everybody knows the value of closed captioning. and that it's a good thing to do. The hard thing is realizing you're not Montgomery County and you don't have the resources to do everything that they can. So that's why it's hard talking about solutions. But even if you are a station that does not necessarily under a regulatory scheme have to provide closed captioning, many of our members, the PEG stations out there, do. For instance, one of our members, they currently closed caption about 200 meetings a year, because that's what they have funding for. But that leaves over 300, they caption 200 and they broadcast another 300 that they do not have the funds to caption. They pay $110 an hour for that service. They budget $140,000 a year for that, which represents about 8% of their overall budget. So this is not a cheap endeavor for folks, but they do realize the importance of it, especially in their particular communities, and they do go out and take care of that. One of the things that we're talking about here on this panel was solutions, and we've already heard that those free services, such as volunteers, aren't really free, or the do-it-yourself isn't really free. So really, what is the answer here to provide closed captioning on all these shows nationwide so all our residents understand what's going on in their communities? And the real simple answer is money. And with that, I could just sit back and leave it at that. But that's the answer, folks. It's money. But it also is taking part in workshops like this where we can discuss various ideas about how people can do things. I think I kind of agree with our other speakers here as far as voice to text. Is technology ever going to get to a place where the cost of doing captioning is going to fall? I'm one of those people that have learned over the 5 years of being an ED at NATOA never to underestimate technology. There are probably a couple guys working in a garage somewhere that are going to come up with some app and take care of this problem for us overnight. So again, I never give up on technology. Somewhere down the line it's going to necessarily have to happen. But prices are also coming down in certain areas on these types of services. So it's really important that we talk about what communities are doing in order to bring this type of these services available. And I don't mean to pick on Montgomery County, but because they are one of my members, but I do have a lot of members that I'm sure are watching this workshop right now, and they're throwing their shoes at their screen saying, "Oh, lucky you. I wish we could do this too." And I have a bunch of folks up in New Jersey that are probably doing more than throwing shoes. But they're interested as well as what's the solution to this. And let me tell you, when this workshop was announced, and I think Mike Wassenauer from ACM can say the same thing, we got emails and phone calls saying, what's the purpose of this? Are they going to come down and say, we have to start closed captioning all our programming? And we had a lot of concerned calls about that because, as some folks have told me, Steve, in order to put this in our budget and do the services, I would have to lay off staff. I would have to cut back on the number of programs that I show. What's the trade-off going to be? And granted, it does come down to a community decision. It's what do your community leaders value in your community? They do get funding from PEG fees, but as we've heard from a couple panelists, PEG fees right now are limited to be used only for capital expenses. So you can't use those to pay for captioning services because that would be an operational expense, so that's difficult. Some PEG stations do get franchise fees to help support their services. They can use those monies for anything. But a lot of stations nationwide, I know, depend on their local governments to give them general fund monies. And while those funds can be used for any purpose, it's really a fight in your community. Where are those monies going to go? Where does closed captioning on PEG programming fall as a priority for our community? And that's really where community choice, community action, PEG viewers come into view. The disabled community comes into action. If it's important, let your elected officials know that, so they can determine best how those scarce budgetary dollars can be spent. Again, it's easy to say the value of closed captioning, and especially closed captioning, I think, of local council meetings where decisions are made that directly affect the taxpayers and the residents of communities. unfortunately, how do you make sure that those hearings are closed captioned so that everyone can join in? When Greg first started this whole session this afternoon, he had indicated that this workshop was really about expanding access. Well, the core value of PEG operations is expanding access from point A. Because think of how many people watch their council meetings online or on their television sets, or they pull up an archived copy of it to find out. That is access to folks who do not have the time to go and see these hearings in person. So PEG stations have already stepped out and have improved access just by broadcasting these meetings. So I think that's something very, very important to keep in mind, that public access and government channels are in the business of expanding access. It's just how do we keep moving the ball forward each time as we go along. And with that, I will go ahead and head off to our next speaker. Oh, and I'm sorry I didn't give you an answer, but money.
Thank you, Steve, for explaining some of those realities that exist, and at the same time looking at ways that we can continue that work to expand access. I have a question, but I suspect that Carl may have an answer to that, so I'm going to probably turn it over to Carl right now. Carl?
So, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you. I hate going last because everybody's already all said it. But I'm in a unique position that I can provide a perspective as a consumer, as a person who is hard of hearing, as a person who used to work in film and television out in Los Angeles many years ago when I graduated from film and television school, as a person who'd also worked in the captioning industry when I worked for WGBH's Media Access Group as a caption provider, and now as a person in government services who is responsible for making sure that the programming we provide is accessible to everybody. As I mentioned earlier, I'm the ADA coordinator for the State House, which has the executive branch, the governor's office, the legislative branch, and the constitutional offices. But I'm also on the Mayor's Commission for Persons with Disabilities for the City of Boston. So I have been involved both at the state level and the municipality level in negotiating contracts for captioning of the programming. At the state level, we do about 400 hours a year of the formal sessions of the House and Senate. And I'll admit, we originally got into that because we were fearful of a lawsuit that was pending, and rather than go to court and be fearful of losing, we settled that. And although it was captioning was a very, very small component of the overall lawsuit, it was one of the things that made it. And one of the reasons why I have continuing funding for that lawsuit, for the captioning, is because we negotiated that we would continue to fund that yearly. Now, with production services is growing and growing, and they're starting to do things outside, videotaping live outside of the formal sessions, and I haven't yet gotten funding for those unless it's a particular sensitive hearing. Like last week we had a hearing on insurance paying for cochlear implants, so I was able to get approval for that. For the City of Boston, they just did it because the ADA coordinator commissioner for the City of Boston thought that it applied under Title II and Section 504 of the Rehab Act as mentioned earlier. Now, what are some of the things I've done to try to look at cost or solutions? And one, part of the role of government is to be transparent and accessible and educate them as what's going on. I actually get less calls from the disability community now that we're captioning things than I used to saying what's going on. I used to get calls all the time because I think they felt comfortable reaching out to me as a disabled individual myself from the disability community, and now they're being educated. When we redo, say, a hearing room, and they're putting in a brand new sound system, I'll ask them to buy a caption encoder or a telephone line or a video encoder or something that I know will help caption, and it'll get put into another budget. When the information services is getting ready to redo the website, I'll ask them to tweak the caption media player so that, it doesn't necessarily, when we negotiate contract with the caption writers, I ask for half-hour rates instead of hour rates. They don't necessarily like this. But if I have a hearing that's 70 minutes long, instead of getting charged for 2 hours, I can get charged for 90 minutes. The other thing I think that a lot of the production people do wrong is that they see this as an additional cost to what they're doing. And I think we need to change the frame of mind to build it into your annual budget over time. I mean, just like you would pay for, I don't know, heating of your building every year regardless, I think you need to think of it that way too, rather than an additional cost that is part of your overall budget, and you need to slowly over time build it into your annual budget. That's easier said than done, like Steve said next to me, money. And as far as real-time captioning cost, it's hard. I don't know of a way to cut cost on that, because as a user of captioning myself, I want a good quality user experience with an accuracy rate at 96 to 98% at 250 words a minute. Because if it's less than that, it's frustrating. I don't know what's going on. So, it's hard to cut costs, but there are ways to build in the equipment into when other parts of the capital improvements are being made, tweak the players when the coders, and we are starting to look at the transcript. The legislative aides now use the transcript to do their research and help the legislators form their opinions. We don't necessarily use the transcript as official record because, as one of the caption providers mentioned earlier, they have to sometimes change how they type, and it's hard to be 100% accurate, so then we don't want them to be official records. But we are also looking at, I think the gentleman from Free Play Media, we are looking at the capability of indexing and searching database, because we were going to do that anyway on the programming side of the website for journal searches, and lobbyists could do their research. So we're not only looking at just to search the video to get to a certain point in the video, we want the data itself, so that, and we might actually save a lot of money in programming costs, because we're paying these IT developers 6 figures just to do coding. So we're trying to look at the multiple ways. But I will say the other thing I've done is I reach out to key figures in the building who I know are hard of hearing, or who have children who are hard of hearing, and I say, hey, how did you like that caption, that session that was captioned? And they'll all tell you they loved it, and they'll keep an eye on it. So I would say, get allies in the community, whether they be from the deaf or hard of hearing community, or whether they're related to those in the deaf and hard of hearing community. Get supporters. As he said, it's a matter of getting support. I think if you get support, that'll increase your priority. Look at how, when other things are funded, see if you can piggyback on those things, and constantly negotiate with your caption providers. Because if you say, hey, I can guarantee you such and such a year, can you guarantee me this rate? They might be willing to work with you. And but I will tell you, as a user of captioning services, it's a valuable service, and I hope that we all can figure out a way to work collaboratively to make PEG programming more accessible to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Wow, a whole host of tips there, a wealth of information shared with everyone. Time is running short. We have between 5 and 10 minutes for questions. I'm going to first turn it over to those who are in the room, the audience. Before we go to the online questions, anyone in the room that would like to ask a question or make a comment, please come to the center aisle.
Hi, hello. My name is Elliot Roberts. I own a local closed captioning and subtitling company in Montgomery County. And, I've we do closed captioning and subtitling services, and I know I may be doing myself a disservice by making a suggestion like this, but, I know that, when you're on a really, really tight budget, and even live captioning, even at its lowest rate, maybe $100 an hour is just still beyond one's budget, you have to explore other options. Obviously, truly automated captioning, like you see on YouTube, it's just never acceptable. Has anyone ever considered sort of a hybrid where you use something like a shadow speaker? And what I mean by that is you have a live event going on, and what you have is an individual, one person, shadow speaking, using voice recognition software that has learned that person's voice. So it's pretty accurate. I can't say how close it is to a steno writer who's I know it takes years and a lot of time to hone one's craft as a steno writer. It doesn't take quite as long to learn to use speech recognition software, and the accuracy is, I want to say it's comparable, but it's in the 90% range, not the 80%. And it would allow an organization to essentially bring the live captioning in-house by just having a few individuals who just spent not that much time training on this shadow speaking software to get that accuracy quite high. So just any thoughts if anyone's ever considered something like that?
I have. So the state of Connecticut actually has a production center where they tied the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive branch into one production center. And they do about 1,000 hours of program, all of it which is captioned, and they use that technology you are actually talking about, and they actually hire their own caption writers. Actually, they have an arrangement with the local commission for the blind where they employ the blind and visually impaired to be the caption writers using that very technology. I haven't had I have a field trip. I'm going up to look at it, but it is something the state of Connecticut is doing, and they do about 1,000 hours a year. So that might be worth looking at for those in the room to see. I haven't had a chance to see what the quality is yet, though.
Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Karin Broom. I am the Secretary of the National Verbatim Reporters Association. I am also a CART captioner. I do what he just said. We call it voice writing. It's not called shadow speaking in our industry. It is exceptionally accurate. I have personally captioned His Holiness the Pope for the beatification ceremony that was broadcast worldwide. About 2.7 billion people watch the captions. We are here not to have any argument between a machine writer or a voice writer in this industry, but we are here to introduce ourselves, to let you know that there is this option available, and to discuss how we can further serve your community. And so that's all I'll talk about right now, but we are sitting here if you would like to talk to us later on.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mitzi.
Hi, Mitzi Herrera from Montgomery County, Maryland. I know we've been joking about Montgomery County, but I did want to just point out that it's been a long process to get there. Claude, who was here, served on our cable commission when we did not close caption. And it was the fact that he advocated for that, and we tried to work in incremental steps to move it forward. It's been a 15-year process to get us to where it has been as robust. And we have built relationships with elected officials who have supported their use of it in meetings as ways to communicate to constituents. And we have worked with our cable operators, some of whom have allowed us to use those cable capital funds for operating, which is in part what has helped that. So we're here in D.C., and we've had, I think, in this room a really good conversation between people in the accessibility community and people in the PEG access community. And I just want to encourage that for the people who are watching it from their offices is to reach out to organizations in your community to build the information about how many people use those captions, introducing them to your legislature as a way to make steps and get to the point. And I just didn't want to leave it out there that somehow we just got there automatically. It was a lot of people like Donna Keating and Claude and other people working to advocate, and you can do it, but you have to start somewhere.
I mentioned partnership, and that's really what it is. It's a partnership with the community across the board. We work very closely, as Mitzi mentioned, with our commission on people with disabilities, and they are there to make sure, quite honestly, that we are providing the service. So I would be interested in talking with both of you.
And if I can just say one thing, Mitzi brought up a very important point, and that's for those folks that have a relationship with their cable provider in their communities, talk to them, because they may be willing to give you a wink and a nod on using your franchise fees or your PEG fees to provide these type of services. It's a great PR move for the company, and it's a great service, and hopefully a lot of them will recognize that.
Yes, and I think that Mitzi makes a great point about needing to have data and support from the disability community. I know someone mentioned earlier today, to put this in a bit of a different light, that 80% of people who are viewing captioning are not deaf or hard of hearing. And that's something for us all to make sure that we keep in mind throughout the conversation today. Next question. Yeah, please, Jason.
I want to echo something Carl said earlier. I think it's incredibly important for budgeting these values, and I want to frame it in that mode. Is like, we all value this service, but if you don't really build this value in your budget, and so like Carl's example is when he was looking at building out a room, he made sure there was a phone line in there, right? And that's part of valuing, your budgeting your values. And so when we were looking at closed captioning, we were like, well, what revenue are we bringing in by executing the service? And so we tagged some of our YouTube revenue, because of the search, the value the search gave us, to making sure that service was executed. So it was, we're making a direct line between our budget and this value. And there's even more potential with that, and like siloing these archives and siloing these transcriptions, and actually like having people charge, you open a service where people pay you a licensing fee to access those search engines and those transcripts. And so if these lobbying groups or these activist groups or these other politicians want to know what their opponents said or want to know what their other people say, they pay you to access your archives that you get by executing this value, right? This good thing for the community. But you trap this data, and you then use that data as leverage to make money. And those are all possible if you really look at these values and build them into your budgets. I just wanted, I heard Carl say that, and it's something that I really believe in. So I just wanted to echo that to make sure I got that out there.
Okay, thank you. And to the aisle?
Yes. Hi, my name is Matthew Clark. I'm a producer with PhillyCam, which is Philadelphia's 6-year-old community access media station. And I'm glad actually I followed Mitzi talking about the growth of where, how County Cable Montgomery, how you guys didn't start yesterday. You've been working on this process for over a decade now. So we in Philadelphia haven't started the process yet, and this is something I'm very passionate about. And thankfully, it happened to line up with us renegotiating our franchise agreement with Comcast, and they have a little bit of that money I hear people want to use. So, just for could someone just talk about where would you start? Is it training our producers to be volunteer captioners? Is it hiring other people to do this for us? If you were to start today, how would you put one step in front of the other to develop these resources?
I can answer that real quickly. So one of the things that we do or we did when I was with that organization is we tried to have regular community meetings, like meetups or whatever, and the meetups per topic. And so we would say, hey, who's interested in this and who's interested in that? And we will get together and we'll have some beers and we'll talk and have fun. And we'll learn who's in our community that has skill sets that are going to be valuable for us executing different tasks. And so what we found is that there are a significant amount of retirees who really care a lot about a whole lot of issues and have extra time on their hands. And they're very literate. They understand. They know how to write. They get context. They want to engage with these things. And so we find them and they say, hey, help us transcribe these videos. Watch these live. If you can help with it during it's live, or if you can help with it after, we'll get you the video and with the YouTube, whatever YouTube sends us, and perfect it. But it takes a regular, constant presence in your community with targeted meetings, having fun, like socializing, having a few beers, whatever. But really working with these people and finding the gold nuggets that are out there, because they're out there. And they're in every community. And if you find them, they will help you.
And I would say set a goal. It might be you want to do 100 hours of programming or something, so that you're working towards something. Once you set up this group, now we're going to do X.
Is there just one little quick follow-up? You sound like really kind of I don't want to say no cost or low cost, because obviously you're talking about time and training volunteers and all that kind of stuff. But it doesn't sound like there's necessarily any specialized equipment you need to worry about. Am I right?
No specialized equipment. No, we need a good video camera, audio. Of course, you need to get good quality, when you're shooting. But basically, YouTube's free. You go to YouTube channel, you follow the instructions, and it spits out something that you can use, and you perfect it. And I mean that's super simplified. The work is in your staff's time to work with the volunteers, to set up the meetings, to develop those relationships. But that's if you have a staff member that's a community outreach person, that's their job.
Right. Great. Thanks so much.
The other thing I would say is don't underestimate the ability of government agencies to want to help you pay for your captioning. So if you're doing a city council meeting, approach the town and say, hey, we want to help you meet your Title II obligation. Can you help us out here? Don't be afraid to, or if you're doing a state thing, don't be afraid to say, we'll handle the production, but we need help with the captioning because we want you to meet your Title II obligation. And see what happens.
Thank you.
Steve?
A couple of things. A thought that we've had that we haven't implemented in St. Paul, but we've thought about it, is if you have the equipment and the software and you build a little expertise around that, you could start to offer that as a service, and then it's a little revenue stream, which could help underwrite some of the costs. The other thing I want to mention is that so when we talk about PEG programming, in St. Paul, the G is carried out by the municipality. The city of St. Paul operates their own channel. It's not terribly hard for me to picture the city, undertaking the task of closed captioning, and often public meetings there's a transcript created anyway for Granicus or something. In our city, the E in PEG, the public schools have participation, and there's the school board meetings and so forth. It's not terribly hard to imagine some participation there to meet the requirement. But I do worry a little bit about the public programming, which is the bulk of the programming that we see. It's, hundreds and hundreds of hours of programs produced by volunteer producers from the public, and so I think there would really have to be something institutional done to help caption that programming. It's the majority, obviously, of the programming that comes through our doors.
Okay, thank you. So we are on our last several questions that have come in online. Unfortunately, we're not able to answer all of them now or even present all of them to you now because we are out of time. Those questions that have not been answered this afternoon during the session will be answered through email after the session. We'll make sure that we get back to those people. So rest assured, you will get the answer to your question, whether it is during the remaining minutes of our session today or subsequent to the session today. A couple that we will try to get to. First, let's start with a question from Jack Chin. And Jack Chin asks, does anyone on the panel connect their caption encoders over the internet? How reliable is that as compared to telephone lines? Carl? I'm sorry.
Oh, you go ahead. No, it's the same concept. I was just going to say it's fairly easy. We use the same line 21 encoder that we use for broadcast and simply marry it to the signal for the internet and just leave the captions open on the internet.
What he said, but I was going to say it less technically because my engineers would know how to answer that, so we do that.
And it looks like the remaining questions we're going to have to answer via email after our session because we are out of time, but we really appreciate all of our panelists sharing your wealth of information and expertise with us. We've learned so much from all of you this afternoon, and I can see the enthusiasm growing in the room, and I will borrow the chairman's favorite quote that this is only the beginning of working to expand the access for PEG channels moving forward. And I know we are all in different scenarios, whether we be in small markets or big markets and small budgets or large, but one thing in common is that we all have creative minds, and thank you for all of your work, and we look forward to seeing the wonderful things you'll do together in the future.
And with that, I would like to also give kudos to you, Greg, for your moderation of the panel, and thank you again to the panelists. We do have some closing remarks, so if you wouldn't mind just sitting tight for a second. Elaine Gardner would like to add some remarks, and Karen Pelt-Strauss as well has some things to share to close out the session with some closing thoughts.
Great. Thanks a whole lot, Susie. I'm Elaine Gardner. I'm another attorney at the Disability Rights Office here at the FCC. I just wanted to summarize just very briefly what we learned today. It was fascinating. I thought all three panels were great. In the first panel, we learned about the benefits of captioning, not only to deaf people, but to others, and including the fact that was repeated in each panel, that captions make video content searchable, a very important point nowadays. We also learned in the first panel about the current legal requirements for captioning, the FCC rules, and the ADA obligations. In the second panel, we learned about best practices, the industry's best practices, captioners' best practices. We learned about problems that users may have that are not addressed by those best practices, and also about advances that are being made in captioning technology. I think we heard a bet between Christian and Toll about how soon those advances would really be successful. In the third panel, we talked about funding and solutions. We heard a lot of real interesting ideas about volunteer captioning and other economical solutions that, like shadow captioning, that would still provide quality captions, and what PEGs are doing right now to caption and to caption well, and how to prioritize and budget for captioning expenses. Well, that's my summary, but I would like to introduce Karen Pelt-Strauss, who is the Deputy Chief for the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. Thank you.
So, go ahead and clap. So thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank all the panelists for being here. It was an extraordinary day, and you may have seen me come in and out, but
I was able to watch it from my office as well. And I learned a tremendous amount. I want to start, though, and finish with a quick story. Elaine and I used to work at the National Center for Law and the Deaf at Gallaudet University many years ago, for decades, actually. We were there decades ago, and we were there for decades. We won't go into our age. And we had some interesting clients come to us, and a couple of them we were reminiscing about. One was a young deaf boy who came in and told us he had gotten arrested, and he didn't realize that he had Miranda rights because he never watched. At that time, he couldn't watch television with captions, and he didn't know that he had the right to an attorney when he got arrested. So he had given up his right to an attorney, not knowing, because he hadn't learned this from television. Another woman came in and told us that she was really upset because she had gotten her medical results back from a test that she took, and they were negative, and she didn't realize that a negative result was a very good thing to get on a medical test. Again, she hadn't had access to hospital programs on television, medical shows. The reason I raise these is because we take for granted the things that we see on TV. We're so accustomed to having full access to the nuances, the mores, everything, the societal information that kind of comes to us almost through osmosis through television programs. For your kind of programming, for PEG programming, it's even more critical to have access. I mean, television shows, recreational shows are important enough for these reasons that I just described. But the kind of programming on PEG programming is vital to an active citizenry, an informed electorate, integration into the community. If you don't have access to council hearings, and the only way to watch them is on TV, and you need captions to access them, you're not going to be able to participate in the decision-making of your community. So I can't emphasize enough that when captions first start, when the movement for closed captions first started back in the 70s and the 80s, the focus was on actually originally emergency programming, but news and public affairs. That's what people wanted access to. Far less concerned about their recreational programming. They wanted access so they could be an informed citizen community, informed and active citizenry. So just keep that in mind as you move forward and try to implement some of the incredibly creative solutions that we heard from this last panel. The idea of using volunteers, the idea of having people train speech recognition programs. I can tell you that I've used one of those programs. I trained my voice into it, and the results were remarkable. I would never think that that was enough. You have to go back and do the corrections. But, you could have university students who are looking for credits, for example, in their schools, and you could have them go in and train their voice into one of these, or train one of these speech recognition programs and caption a pre-recorded program where they have the opportunity to go back and make the corrections. So I love the various different creative opportunities that you put forth in the last panel. I also want to really applaud once again Montgomery County, especially for your captioning of Spanish language programming. When the FCC first adopted its rules back in 1997, it actually excluded Spanish language, and there was an appeal filed by the National Association of the Deaf to include this population, which is growing by leaps and bounds. And if you speak Spanish in an English society and you're deaf, then you have a double language barrier. So giving this community, access to essential information, again, for them to become an informed community, that is so critical. So I really do applaud you for doing that. I love the analogy of it's like heating in your building. I mean, captioning when it first started was seen as a burden for even broadcasters that had money. Once you start thinking of it as a given and coming up with these ways to fund it, it does become second nature. So I'm hoping that a lot of you got good ideas, listened to the very excellent ideas that came across here and that you implement them. And then finally, I just want to reiterate what Greg said, that we do have rules requiring emergency access already. That's not voluntary, but there could be other information that you could be providing that's like public safety information, not about immediate emergencies. Again, think of how important it is to get that information to as many people as you can. So we really do applaud the Alliance for Community Media and the rest of you that have come forth, and NATOA, and all of you who have come forward and given us your time and your efforts and your resources today to participate. And we hope that you take back all that you've learned and use it. And we will continue to be a resource to you as you need us to be. So thank you again, and have a wonderful evening. I also want to give a huge thanks to Susie for putting this together. It was a huge accomplishment. And thank you for hosting the food as well.